Chapter 47-43. There was silence in the heavenly court, and Jian Wushuang looked at him. I'm not wrong, and the penalty can't be said naturally. Zhen Wuyang said in a deep voice. Heaven does not allow blood to be contaminated, but you have killed more than a dozen Yenxian. Isn't it a matter of seeing the rules of heaven? Jian Wushuang calmed himself. If I do NT have to deter them, ICA NT stand here now. People do NT offend me. I do NT have to bother, but if people offend me and wipe out threats, it's the best choice. I don't think of any kind of threat. It's not a threat to change a place, whether it's in heaven or anywhere. All I can do is wipe out these threats by any means. Heaven was so quiet that the needle fell, but only Jian Wushuang's voice was recalling, and all the elders looked at him in a fixed manner. They didn't expect that this guy who suppresses the Yenxian powerfully in the realm of the realm and sweeps away the threats with his own strength, the words and behavior style are so similar. Zhen Wuyang sat on the throne without a word, staring blankly at Jian Wushuang. At the same time, a great power came quietly in the heavenly court. Jian Wushuang only felt an unspeakable pressure, sinking on every inch of his skin, just like the 100,000 Shinfeng peaks. He bit the tip of his tongue without trace, and even did not exert his strength, resisting it with the strength of his body. Yu Bo, who was standing behind Zhen Wuyang, also raised his muddy eyes at the moment to look at Jian Wushuang, and then watched his nose again. The little emperor also noticed that when he looked cold, he immediately pulled out the soft sword around his waist, and the sword cut off the pressure. Emperor, we are tired. We have to explain things quickly. Let's go to sleep. To face the wall. Little emperor withdrew his soft sword, looking at Zhen Wuyang with a look of anger. Looking at the little emperor who was not afraid and unscrupulous, Zhen Wuyang was surprisingly not angry, wanted to say something, and finally sighed without a good air. Go away. Xiaodaijin raised his eyebrows, and then pulled the sword Wushuang, ready to leave. Wait, Zhen Wuyang's magnificent voice sounded again. Let Yu Chang supervise you and think about it, and you will regret the lack of it. The old man standing behind Zhen Wuyang ordered the two of them step by step, and then issued a restraint with his left and right hands, tying Jian Wushuang and Xiaodaijin directly, and then quickly left the Tianting Giant Hall and rushed to the Listening Wind Tower. When Xiaodaijin's figure disappeared, a moment of loneliness flashed in Zhen Wuyang's eyes. Songxianjia, we rarely get together. Let's go to the Yuega Pavilion for a drink. Yu Bo, let me go if I can't do it. Although I have thought about it, I don't have to imprison personal freedom. In a magnificent place with thousands of peach blossoms and a breeze, the two are bound together, sitting back to back in a pavilion. Jian Wushuang was very depressed, but it was only 10 or 20 Yenxian beheaded, and he was fined for 10 years. Although the scenery is excellent, it is a bit uncomfortable to sit trapped in this pavilion and sit for another 10 years. The little emperor with his back to back was also helpless. He said a good word and didn't let Na Yu release his imprisonment. Little emperor, you will be asleep in 10 years. Yu Bo raised his eyes and looked at him. Then he began to sit down not far away. When I saw that Yu Bo was already sitting, Xiaodaijin pushed the sword without any trace and whispered, I have a soft sword around my waist. You gently pull it out and cut the chain. Jian Wushuang heard the words, and even if he started to touch the waist of the little emperor, the sword is in my belt. What are you doing under my waist? Mistakes, your hands are a bit numb. Don't move. Can I stay still? That's my itchy flesh. After some hard struggles, Jian Wushuang finally pulled out the soft sword and cut off the chain on Xiao Dijuan. Shaking his hand, Xiaodaijin got up and took the soft sword and also broke the chain on his body. Go, it'll take you to a good place. Little Emperor's rare expression of complacency, with a wave of his hand, took Jian Wushuang away. Jian Wushuang was hard to quit, looked back at Yu Bo, who was still sitting, and then left the pavilion with him. Just as the two left, Yubo slowly opened his eyes, shook his head helplessly, and continued to watch the nose. The two were almost blindly saying that I was leaving. How could Yubo not find out? But he had nothing to stop and allowed them to leave. As long as you don't listen to the typhoon, everything is safe. Shinbu was lingering among these thousands of miles of peach blossom forest, and Jian Wushuang's tense state of mind had been relaxed a little. From the mouth of the little emperor, I learned that almost all of the noble fairies in the 9 heavens surrounding the heavens lived in this listening typhoon. It only took more than 1,000 steps to make a peach fairy sitting on the peach branch, holding out the beautiful fairy wine. Brother Jian, how much wine is there? He took off 2 pots of peach blossoms in Taoxian's hands, and Xiaodaijin directly gave Jian Wushuang a pot. It's okay. Jian Wushuang did not quit, holding up the thin ear jug and drinking for a long time. The wine line with a hint of powder enters the throat, and the sweet and sweet meaning is dispersed in the peach forest. Little Emperor smiled slightly and also learned Jian Wushuang, holding up the jug to drink. Although it seems that there is only 1 pot of peach blossom brewed by Taoxian, there are holes in the pot. Jian Wushuang drank about 100 pounds at once, and then stopped, only to feel transparent, unable to say that it was comfortable. The little emperor on the side was like a whale swallowing a cow, and he drank a jug of wine. I said, "You're so drunk, you panic?" Jian Wushuang asked, "For their immortal Yanxian, things like wine, whether sincere or not, are already drunk. Even if it is fairy wine, it is nothing but the taste of the throat, not drunk." But he looked at the little emperor, who had a hazy meaning in his eyes, and found that things were not so simple. "No, are you drunk?" Jian Wushuang asked again. The little emperor with a red face heard the words and shook his head slowly. "No, I'm not drunk. How can I get drunk in this area?" Listening to the sound of this already big tongue, Jian Wushuang was helpless and took the hip flask in his hand. "Hey, shout Taoxian, give the seed a pot again, and ask for aging." Jian Wushuang never imagined that as a Yanxian, she could be drunk by the local liquor. "Don't drink you what will happen to you later. You will be taken back again." Thousands of pounds of wine entered the abdomen, although the little emperor was still awake, but his feet were already floating. Chapter 47-44. If there is no sword Wushuang carrying, I am afraid that even the road will be unstable. Brother Jian, good brother, only you are still by my side. Drunken and dim, Shout Dijuan murmured, "My son Xian has never been as happy as he is today. Without you, I wouldn't be able to step on the soles of those guys so as to vent my hatred. It's you, let me see some hope." Xiao Dijuan smiled and pressed his fist against Jian Wushuang's chest. "In addition, I have said long ago that there is a guarantee for the king. Everything is expected." Smelling the smell, with a faint smell, Jian Wushuang stepped back slightly and said softly, "Sleep for a while, wake up and talk about other things." "Can't sleep. Since we came here to listen to the wind pavilion, I will take you to a good place." Little Emperor's face hung, with a meaningful smile. The next moment, he directly took the sword Wushuang, moving the clouds and driving the fog, bring targeted straight ahead. "Where are you going?" "You'll know later. Definitely a good place to linger." Immortal rhythm. The peach blossom forest that stretches for thousands of miles was left behind, replaced by green bamboos. The whole listening typhoon is equivalent to the back garden of the heavenly court, and it is extremely beautiful. All fairy spirits and fairies play in it, and it is beautiful. Confused by Shao Emperor's sword Wushuang, he vaguely felt that nothing good happened. The more I walked in this listening typhoon, there was a faint smell of incense in the clouds. "Where are you going?" Jian Wushuang confirmed again and again. Xiao Daijin's eyes became more and more hazy. A good place is definitely a place that Brother Jian likes. I've been thinking about it for a long time. Today, I will take you to a turn. No longer talking, Jian Wushuang had to follow him. When the clouds were gathered, a beautiful flowery paradise land appeared in front of us. The little emperor seemed a bit impatient, and the two of them stopped on the top of a low mountain. Brother Jian, and follow me. It was only tens of steps away from the top of the mountain, and the little emperor rushed to the top in one arrow. Jian Wushuang followed, and at the same time, he also had doubts about what was going to make him so excited. Striding up the mountain, Jian Wushuang looked forward. With just one glance, his eyes were completely round, and his eyes revealed unbelievable. Stepping over this mountaintop, I saw that in this fairy-like clear river water, there were nearly 1,000 fairies bathing in it. The beautiful picture is unobstructed. Silver bell-like, playful sounds echoed in the valley, and they were laughing at each other, living like a real fairy bathing picture. Just glanced at it. Jian Wushuang squatted hurriedly, completely hidden in the fairy flower. Did you drink too much fake wine? Is this where we can come? Jian Wushuang was a little annoyed, and he was very angry that the little emperor brought him to this place. Xiao Dijuan also had some doubts in his hazy eyes. He rubbed his eyes vigorously and fixed his eyes for a few more times before murmuring, "No, why did you get here? Hurry up." Jian Wushuang apparently didn't want to stay here any longer. If this was discovered, reputation damage would be a trivial matter. It wouldn't be good to be caught and slammed. These seemingly delicate fairies are all real immortals. The little emperor nodded confusedly, and the two got up and prepared to run. "Oh, who stepped on my hair?" The two froze, turning back slowly. I saw in the cluster of flowers behind him, a small flower fairy was rubbing his head to wake up. Face to face, a cry of exclamation rang through the valley. "Sister, sister, it's them, just peeking at you taking a shower." At this moment, Xiaowaxian said with his hands on his hips, pointing at Jian Wushuang and Xiaodaijin. At the same time, nearly 1,000 fairies who landed from the water have already jumped to the top of the mountain, blocking the two in the middle. They all looked bad, murderous eyes, and wished to eat them alive. This is a big misunderstanding. We accidentally entered here and left. Jian Wuwei was embarrassed and embarrassed. Obviously, this excuse could not convince him. Next, Xiaodaijin closed his eyes and fell asleep. "Sister, don't believe their bullshit. I have long seen that this young man is a color embryo. Do you believe they will intrude here? Obviously, it has been a long time." A man in a thin purple shirt fairy, Lu Mei, raised an angry voice. Another fairy in a yellow shirt was embarrassed. "I have long seen that the emperor's eldest son is not a good person, and Chen Qing beside him is not a good person, and he is naturally not a good person. Yes, never let them go." All fairies echoed, but at the forefront of these fairies, a slightly older, full-featured white shirt fairy didn't make a sound. Her Qiong nose moved slightly, and she was already aware of the alcohol on the little emperor. "Did he drink?" Fairy white shirt inquired. Jian Wushuang nodded. "I drank some in Taolin before, so I broke into here by mistake, and hope the fairy will forgive me." Fairy Bai Shan didn't seem to want to embarrass him, but he only said slowly after carefully examining the swordsmanship, "Death is exempt. Living sin is inescapable. No matter if you are unintentional or sincere, you can't run this day. Now, sisters, just take a breath and hit the dead." Jian Wushuang instantly moved, running his whole body and running away with all his strength. And the little emperor, who pretended to be sleeping, after hearing this sentence, the alcohol awakened most of the time, with a speed not much slower than Jian Wushuang, and fled the Sea of Flowers with all his strength. But there are too many fairies. In order to chase down the two, even all kinds of supernatural powers are used. Chaos Fist is still killing the master, not to mention these shameful fairies. A beating was already a deadly thing. Don't touch me, it still hurts in my face. In a misty cloud, above the pavilion on the top of the mountain, two black shirts sat side by side on the eaves. Brother Jian, it's really my fault. I'm guilty of you. I couldn't drink anymore. It was just a sudden when the alcohol was up that I didn't know how to take you to the place where they bathed. But there is nothing in the world. I have no thought of peeking at all. It is really the wrong place. Shut up. The past will be over. Also, Brother Jian, I'm really not a color embryo. On the eaves of the pavilion, the two figures were speechless, and if they looked closely, the original handsome faces of these two men were all swollen, and they suffered from some serious skin trauma. Chapter 47-45. Jian Wushuang's cheeks were red and swollen due to the dodge, and he was far from the shock of Shao Emperor's face that had been hammered and swollen. These fairies seem to have determined that Xiaodaijin is the real color embryo, and took care of him with all his strength, but Jian Wushuang escaped the disaster. After picking a cloud and waving it on his face, Xiaodaijin went on, Brother Jian, in fact, the place I want to take you to is a place called Jiantian, in this heavenly court. I see, Brother Jian, the sword in your waist is broken, and I want to find another one, or just blend the sword in the sword heaven. Jian Wushuang heard the words and also believed some of what he said. After all, from the perspective of the little emperor's previous style of acting, it was not easy to come up and take him peeking at the fairy to take a bath. Where is the Jiantian you mentioned? Jian Wushuang asked. Probably it's a place to put your obsession, said the little emperor. The people who slept there were the obsessions of some old brothers who were fighting with my emperor. Jian Wushuang nodded and stopped talking. The two rested on the roof of the pavilion for a few days before leaving for Jiantian, out of the listening typhoon, at the edge of the heavenly realm of heaven. A small world in the chaotic haze is reflected in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Even with the strength of his immortal realm, he can explore what is in this chaotic world. But judging from the strong and utter demise of the atmosphere from time to time, any obsession here is probably a terrible existence during his lifetime. Led by the little emperor, after entering the chaotic misty mist, it is really into the so-called sword sky. One step to the ground, raising waves of dust. Jian Wushuang looked around, only to see that the eyes were all endless gray sandstone. The dried trunks of the trees were facing the sky, like the same way to cover the face and weep. This gray sand surface extends all the way to the invisible distance and intersects the sky dome. Stay on the heart. The killing breath here and the obsession are too heavy. If it is eroded, it will be difficult to pull out. Shao Emperor Shen Sheng reminded. Jian Wushuang nodded. From the first moment he entered the Jiantian, he felt the whole world almost completely composed of the meaning of killing and an unspeakable obsession. It is hard for him to imagine that there will be such a place in this peaceful and peaceful heaven. Seemingly aware of the intrusion of external forces, the sword sky and sky began to fluctuate, and a tremendous obsession was shuttled. The little emperor waved a golden seal, and then his obsession disappeared. It was only a few dozen breaths of time to travel through the sword sky, and a black stone giant palace, which was located in the gray sand, appeared. Perhaps no one had set foot here. The giant hall was almost half buried in the gray sand, and it seemed reckless and lonely. In this giant palace, it is the place where my emperor's older brothers put their obsession. Little emperor looked at Jian Wushuang. Your sword is unmatched, but the next guy in this temple is it will definitely help your kendo. Jian Wushuang heard the words and couldn't help but think of the set of swords in his arms. If he really had the horror of the swordsmanship, he could print it down and watch it carefully. With a wave of hand, she pushed open the door of Shen Shen Feng Qi, and a familiar taste of hot iron was introduced into Jian Wushuang's nasal cavity. For swordsmen, this kind of iron and fire breath is the most intimate breath. This is the taste of casting swords. Sword Wushuang, who was originally calm at heart, could not wait to see the man in the mouth of the little emperor. The whole giant hall is wide and huge, and there are no rules in the building. The whole hall is like a burning furnace tripod, and the whole ground seems to be like magma emitting a red color. Jian Wushuang sweeps the entire main hall, except for the seats of 100 seats. Only the fading murals on the surrounding walls are a bit noticeable. Due to a long time ago, this mural has faded and peeled off most, but Jian Wushuang can still guess that these murals should depict the most tragic war. The heavens are torn apart, and countless Yen Xian who is going to succeed are dying determinately. Jian Wushuang did not delve into the meaning of these murals. He believes that all these heavens have a tragic past, and everything in the past cannot be changed. Little Emperor didn't seem to be here for the first time, and was very familiar with the sword Wushuang. After leaving the main hall, the air began to change from stuffy to dry. Even the diffusive force that escapes outside the body has the meaning of being burned, which shows how high the temperature is. This guy is unspoken and silent, but when it comes to casting swords, he said that nobody dare to talk about the second. As he moved forward, the little emperor said, "In addition, he is the only disciple under the seat of an old friend of my emperor, and the sword is unfathomable. Speaking of my emperor's old friend, it is the only one I have seen, the sword immortal with the best swordsmanship." Jian Wushuang listened quietly. As for the current situation of Jian Xian and Dian Huan, he has not yet come into contact with him. And the only one he has encountered so far is only the sword fairy Ding Bai, who has an amazing face in the divine universe. Just a tremendous sword. Wan Jian was overshadowed. However, Jian Wushuang then thought abruptly. Before going to heaven, there was a mysterious man who did not appear from the beginning to the end of the interception, but he ripped hundreds of thousands of miles with his own sword Tianyu, beheaded dozens of Yen Xian. Will the mysterious man be a sword fairy? There is no answer. Some people or things may always be a shock. In order to let this guy concentrate on casting the sword, I concealed all the swords from the entire sword day for him. The last time I met, or during the last heavenly feast, I don't know if this guy has made any progress now. Yu reading. www. Okanshu. Calm walking forward. I do not know how long it took. When the ground beneath my feet disappeared, the entire giant hall reached its end. But the next scene shocked Jian Wushuang's eyes. I saw behind the giant palace there was a chasm of chasm, and in this chasm there is purple magma flowing from the center of the earth, roaring in it. Numerous real swords hang high above the sky, and each real sword slowly drops silvery, white water droplets from the tip of the sword. Jian Wushuang's looks are even more incredible. Every silver white drop is actually a sword. Solid, figurative sword meaning. What kind of technique is it that can actually refine the sword in the true sword? Chapter 47-46. The so-called kendo and so-called sword intentions are all illusions, and they can be carried only by using the medium. The blade itself is a medium, and divine power, virtual power, and even more profound, mysterious power are the ways of carrying and figuring. But this moment really shocked Jian Wushuang. These sword intentions, without the will of the master, there is no way to guide. Only the blade itself which finally acts as an intermediary. But they were actually refined and turned into a drop of silver white droplets. And these sword-like water droplets also dripped from the sky dome into the abyss of that day. Because the temperature is terribly hot, the magma here is a strange fuchsia. Even the true core temperature of the sun can never be compared to this magenta magma. It is too hot. These sword-like drops of rain did not drip into the magma after falling, but they seemed to be connected to one place as if they were connected by something. It was only then that Jian Wushuang was able to find that under the abyss of the sky, there was still a hearth placed in the center of the magnificent magma. This statue seems to be in the burning furnace tripod. As if refining to create a magnificent day, 10,000 strands of golden ons overflowing from the tightly stitched furnace tripod. Dazzling. Those swords like water droplets were all led into the furnace. At the same time, there was another imposing figure, which attracted Jian Wushuang's eyes. I saw it on the side of the furnace, the height of the height, and the naked upper body. The hammer without any emotion, fell on a red sword embryo, sparks overflowing. Such a shocking picture makes Jian Wushuang have a feeling. There is no complexity and subtlety of kendo sword intention. Some are pure iron and fire. Sword makers need a lot of perseverance and great understanding to be able to cast a sword of heaven and earth. This blend of iron and fire is most breathtaking. After 2 or 3 calls, Jian Wushuang recovered. Brother Jian, watch together at close range. Xiao Dijuan smiled. Suppressing the inner restlessness, Jian Wushuang said slowly, "Okay." The 2 yen xian fell into the abyss of the sky. The sturdy figure with the iron hammer in hand, I didn't feel the crimson sword embryo with all my heart coming from outsiders. Stepping on this earth floating on the magma, like a lone boat, Jian Wushuang felt that the force outside the body began to burn. "Bei-chun, I'm here." The little emperor spoke aloud, with a smile in his eyes. After the massive figure hit the sword embryo with a heavy hammer, he stopped the mechanical hammer and turned to look. A black cheek stained with iron shavings, is almost unable to tell where the facial features are. However, Jian Wushuang saw a row of bright teeth. "Brother Yen," the little emperor smiled. "I thought you were stupid, but I still remember me." The height of her body is between several breaths. She shrinks to her normal height, and then runs quickly. His naked upper body, his muscular skin, all covered with flowing clouds and water lines, looked very profound and profound. "Brother Yen, how come you have come here? I remember that it was not long since you last came here." The mixed figure with flowing clouds and water lines scratched his head. The little emperor said helplessly, "It has been a year since you last saw this time. This time it is a feast of heaven." "Actually, after another year, I don't feel anything," said the figure, sucking his lips. "I don't know when my master will come back. You will be back soon. You just need to wait." Xiao Dijuan raised an eyebrow and smiled, and then put his palm on Jian Wushuang's shoulder. "Introduce you, Brother Jian, Wushuang Jian, Ding Bei-chun." The black face also grinned and grinned. One of Jian Wushuang Bao's smiles. Deep in his heart, he felt that the guy with big white teeth in front of him who smiled was not as hard to touch as he had imagined. Looking at the fiery magma that was rolling around, Xiaodijan said, "Bei-chun, it's been several years, and it's time for you to go out and travel. After all, it's too long for you to stay here alone." He reached out and wiped a handful of iron shavings on his face. The young man named Ding Bei-chun said, "When master will come to pick me up, I'm going to leave. Now I'm just casting my sword and casting a sword sheath for the teacher." Jian Wushuang was slightly surprised, but did not expect Ding Bei-chun to cast a sword sheath only. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but ask, "The materials and sword intentions made in this furnace are all prepared for casting the scabbard?" Ding Bei-chun nodded. "Yes, these things are not worthy of my master. I will barely make these things into a scabbard and give it to my master." Jian Wushuang opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. There was a wry smile in the corner of his mouth. Ding Beichen's sentence is really terrifying. With so many supreme swords, it is only suitable for casting into a scabbard. The little emperor is also a natural expression, which confirms Ding Beichen's words. By Beichun, I came here this time, and I also have something to ask for, said Xiao Dijuan. Brother Jian has a sword that he wears with him. Is it possible to repair it? Ding Beichun did not hesitate. Naturally, can you show me the broken situation? Jian Wushuang nodded, then pulled out the Tailuo Excalibur from his waist. The sword body came out of the sheath and issued a clear voice. Although the sword body had broken from the middle, it did not affect Chong Xiao's sharp intention at all. Ding Beichen's eyes suddenly lit up, took the broken Tailuo Excalibur, looked it over carefully, and then said, "It's incredible. Such a good sword actually contains great luck." Jian Wushuang heard the words and nodded secretly in his heart. It seemed that Ding Beichun was the true master of sword forging. He was able to perceive the luck in Tai Luo Excalibur the first time. As one of the seven-handed pole ancestors in the divine universe, the Tai Luo Excalibur contained in it was naturally terrifying. This is why the Tarot Excalibur is broken. The sword Wushuang is still worn by the side. The luck and other mysterious and profound things, there are too many thoughts of controlling the road, which can deepen the perception of sitting. How can it be completely repaired? Xiao Dijuan asked. Holding Taro Excalibur tightly, Ding Beichun nodded. Absolutely. It is possible to repair such a real sword. For me, it is also another perception of the sword. The little emperor nodded. Then I will leave it to you. If the repair is not good, I will ask you. Chapter 47:47. Ding Beichun grinned. His eyes did not leave the Tai Luo Excalibur. Rest assured, there is no real sword that Ding Beichun can't handle in the world. After all, being able to use such a real sword, I am afraid that the sword brothers have already realized their swordsmanship. Xiaodigen smiled, then raised his eyebrows. Beichun, if I say his swordsmanship, his future will not be under your master. Do you believe it? Ding Beichun raised his head and looked at Jian Wushuang with full of disbelief. Beyond my master? Don't laugh. Brother Yen, I haven't seen anyone who can surpass my master in kendo so far. Then you haven't seen it now, Xiao Dijuan said. Ding Beichen's eyes became more and more bright. Brother Jian, are you a sword fairy? Jian Wushuang heard the words, shook his head, and smiled bitterly. Jianxian can't talk. At most it has his own perception of kendo. That's great. I followed the master to practice kendo before I started to build the sword, Ding Beichun said, excitedly. Brother Sword, otherwise we will discuss how I haven't been in a long time. I have studied with others. Nonsense. We are here. Xiao Emperor was stopped by Jian Wushuang before he could finish. He said, we just don't have much to do. Brother Beichun and I have a discussion here. It's not bad. I'm going to prepare. Ding Beichun said this, hurriedly swept towards the tens of thousands of feet of furnace tripod, manipulating the giant force to turn the Dingai. Ding Beichun threw the Tai Luo Excalibur in a hurry, and then quickly returned to the two. I said, you just threw the sword in, is it okay? Xiao Dijuan wondered. Relax if you want to recast the sword. The first step is to smelt the embryo. I have my own measure. Ding Beichun can't wait any longer. Brother Jian, let's start. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile, and withdrawing a little step was 100 feet away. Ding Beichun didn't talk much anymore, and with one hand directly, a real sword broke through the sky and fell into his palm. Holding the real sword, his whole person's breath is condensed, as if the sword is out of the box. The iron filings fell off, slowly revealing a heroic cheek, and the elaborate upper body seemed to have kendo flowing, and the flowing clouds and water lines were flowing. Jian Wushuang breathed his breath, and the invisible long sword condensed out of Wushuang kendo appeared in his hands. Seeing this scene, Ding Beichen's eyes were brighter, and he was able to consolidate the swordsmanship. Even if he watched countless swords, he had only seen them a few times. And to be able to achieve this point, it is all sword-repairing power. The little emperor looked at the scene of the killing and retreated helplessly. No one can dissuade the relatives of Jianxi. At the next moment, Ding Beichun took the lead and swept with a vast sword. But for a moment, the two swords were opposed, and the blades collided. Zhang, zhang, zhang. It seems that a sword collision, but it has already been tens of thousands of moves. Feng Rui's long sword opened and closed, and Ding Beichun at the moment seemed to be immersed in the cast sword, and the fancy sword and the sword were quickly cut off. For any Yanxian game, I am afraid that the body has disappeared under this blow. Rao Shijian Wushuang felt great pressure. This guy was not only able to beat the hammer, but also the sword. Although Jian Wushuang didn't retreat under this wide-open slash, the ground beneath his feet had cracked a deep gully. However, in the next match, Ding Beichun's real sword was already unable to adapt to such a high-intensity confrontation, and was directly cut into two segments by Jian Wushuang. Happy! Ding Beichun, who was forced to retreat by a sword, laughed, and after throwing away the broken sword, he picked up a real sword from the sky. Brother Jian, the next thing is my sword intention, he said with a deep voice. The flowing clouds and water on his body began to surge. It seemed that the strength within the entire abyss of heaven was awakened by him, carrying a large amount of magenta magma, and a treasure image was materialized behind him. An indescribable heavy pressure came, and Jian Wushuang retreated half a step with his right foot with an invisible long sword in front of him. Facing the vast treasure in front of him, he was extremely calm, as if he had been used to it. After condensing this sword and treasure image, Ding Beichun directly held up the real sword in his hand and slashed it towards Jian Wushuang. Boom! The space is tearing, purple magma is galloping, and the sword is not a long sword but a blunt object. Just like the blunt object of the mighty giant hammer, it fell down heavily, and Jian Wushuang also aroused a style of Star River, Lake, and Sea sword intention at this moment. Star-style swordsmanship came out, and a pair of unparalleled treasures of the same size came, and their palms were tenaciously attacked. Seeing this scene, the little emperor flew directly at the next moment. Boom! The unprecedented martyrdom exploded, and the two treasures were wiped out together, triggering a natural turmoil, and the endless gang wind ripped open space. Almost at the same time when the two treasures collided, a black ranger broke open and died, resolutely slashing to Ding Beichun. Zhang! Ding Beichun hurriedly raised his sword to resist, never thinking that the real sword in his hand was actually directly cut into two sections. A sword tip that seemed to be condensed by the flowing cloud, then touched his neck. It's really too fast, from the first confrontation to the first collision of kendo, but it's only a breath of time. But it was during this time of interest that this situation was formed. The sword that Wushuang touched on his neck, even if he could not be headed directly, could definitely be hit hard. This level of collision, once hit hard, will only end in 10 lives. It's just that Ding Beichun couldn't believe it, and he was defeated like this. He suffocated a bit, and obviously used the first type of swordsmanship, which became the situation now. Jian Wushuang also left a deep impression on him. The shot was fierce, and he was a strong opponent. Seemingly seeing the sullenness in Ding Beichun's eyes, Jian Wushuang smiled. And you read the book www.okanshu.com, carrying the long sword back to buy Zangyuan. Come again. Ding Beichun's eyes lit up. Although he already knew the difference between him and Jian Wushuang, he did not want to give up this opportunity and chose to fight again. This time, he no longer picked up the real sword on the sky dome, but like Jian Wushuang, slowly formed an invisible longsword. This is condensed by his own sense of swordsmanship, and is the sword blade that best fits his own. But because there is no figurative blade, the power displayed is extremely unstable. For example, Ding Bei-chun at the moment. Although the invisible longsword is also condensed, but the sword meaning is very volatile, and it seems that it can disperse at any time. The invisible long sword of Wushuang's sword has never been said to be unstable. This is the desperate sword meaning that he realized in the sad land, which has already been tempered to the top. Chapter 47-48. Jieni Kendo has become a mountain and sea, and it has nothing to do with it. Even if you don't need the sword to condense the blade, just use a branch, a grass. The sword Wushuang is confident that he can play the sword power of Wushuang Kendo. Earlier in the Heavenly Palace of Divine Power Universe, he discussed the sword with the sword Fairy Ding Bai for more than 10,000 years, using a peach blossom branch. The invisible long sword condensed out, and the breath of Ding Beichun's whole body was as if it were a sword. Wisps of invisible swords escaped from each of his pores, and his fine upper body, flowing clouds, and water patterns began to fluctuate like the rise of the rivers and seas. A sword pointed before, and about 10,000 waves of water waves attached to the blade, as if the dragon was ready to attack. My sword is called the Seven Swords of Bei-chun. Although it has the name of the seven swords, it is only 3 swords, and the remaining 4 swords, I am afraid it is difficult to complete, Ding Bei-chun said slowly. However, my only 3 swords have forced 6,000 to retreat into Yending cultivation, and I haven't lost it yet. Please take a look today. Jian Wushuang heard the words, point to stop. There was a ripple in the air quietly. Ding Bei-chun condensed on the spot, but his breath suddenly fell with the invisible sword in his hand. It was only then that Jian Wushuang discovered that the dense flowing clouds and water patterns on Ding Beichun's body were not a certain pattern, but a sword-like sword prop. Each flowing cloud and water pattern is a sword meaning. At this moment, almost half of the entire abyss of the sky is covered by Ding Beichun's sword way. Just like a million swords, the unprecedented pressure made sword Wushuang all dignified. A star-shaped sword in the previous note forced Ding Bei-chun to retreat. The sword meaning of the river word also followed, and the more powerful and majestic sword meaning became the surging Tianhe, which emerged from the sleeve of Jian Wushuang. Regarding Wushuang Kendo, the first 2 styles of Xinghe Lake's sword intentions, nowadays Jian Wushuang becomes more and more clear to the heart. The 2 sword meanings of the star character and the river character not only complement each other, but also have their own unique sword potential. These 2 types of swordsmanship serve as the framework and cornerstone of the entire unparalleled swordsmanship, so that there is no mutual crushing situation between them. They are both imposing and powerful and have an endless potential of swordsmanship. Perhaps only the latter 2 forms, lake and sea, will have more terrifying and amazing performances. The so-called kendo, sword technique, sword intention. Even if the packaging is more gorgeous in the final analysis, it is nothing more than a killing skill. Only the more powerful and prodigal is the ultimate goal. This time, Jian Wushuang took the lead. A sword pushed millions, and the river of sword waterfalls rushed to Ding Bei-chun. Jian Wushuang no longer sat on the long river, but stood on the spot, raised his hands to condense an invisible sword buried in the long river of the sword waterfall, and headed forward. At the moment, Ding Beichun's eyes are full of fanaticism. The sword patterns on his body are all engraved by the master's hand, and he can retreat 6,000 tops with one blow. If his sword is defeated, does it mean that the young man in front of him really has the power to fight against Master? Xianhe's dazzling flowing clouds and water ripples, like hundreds of dragons, coiled around each other. The 2 kendos, which belong to the same extreme, collided. The little emperor who watched from afar, his eyes were horrified again, and he almost retreated from the abyss of this rift with almost no thought. Bum, boom. The shocking blow shattered everything he could see. The sea of magenta magma leaped, rising 1,000 feet high, and swallowed this last piece of land frantically. At the same time, the whole black stone giant hall began to collapse, and Wanjian, which was suspended above the sky dome, trembled in unison, and then broke together. Such a devastating engagement struck the entire giant Yanxiandi, and at the same time, the invisible aftermath spread across most of the heavens. The thousands of fairies who were still grooming in the Sea of Flowers were the first to feel this aftermath of the shock, and all looked at Jiantian in amazement. Sister, isn't there a place strictly prohibited by the emperor? How could such a loud noise occur? Fairy Huangshan said nervously, "Will you go to the emperor?" Fairy Baishan heard the words and stretched out her thin hand to make a mute. "If we shouldn't ask, we don't care. There will be someone in heaven's court to examine it." The rest of the fairies heard the words and continued to freshen up without speaking. Only a little hesitation flashed in the eyes of the fairy in the white shirt who was able to enter the Jiantian at this moment, and had the authority to enter the Jiantian. Only the little emperor. But what purpose does he enter? Thinking of this, a stream of light transformed into Yanli spread out of her hands, and quickly flew into the clouds and disappeared. At the same time, Yu Bo, sitting in the listening wind, suddenly opened his eyes and disappeared in the next moment. More than half of the black stone giant temple was damaged, and even the ground was opened for nearly 10,000 miles. The purple magma seemed to boil the sky dome, and under the ground like ruins, 3 bodies are standing on the magma. Among them, Ding Bei-chun, who was naked with a naked upper body, gasped heavily. Although Jian Wushuang looked indifferent, the palm of the bleeding bead seemed to indicate that he was not easy to win. In the previous confrontation, although Jian Wushuang added a unique sword to the river-style sword intention, it was almost defeated. He did not expect that Ding Beichun's kendo actually concealed the 3 sword intentions. Combining the 3 into one is a sword. It must be said that this Ding Beichun swordsmanship is extremely strong, with an imposing momentum, faintly making Jian Wushuang feel that it is similar to Ding Baiyi's unique sword. But even so, Jian Wushuang still won. He won't win the realm, not behind Yan Li, purely the victory of kendo competition. After recovering his breath, Ding Beichun arched his hand at Jian Wushuang. "Brother Jian, I lost. Continue to practice diligently. When your swordsmanship is perfect, come to me to testify." Jian Wushuang reported with a smile. Ding Beichun heard and said with a smile, "If I really have the day when kendo is in harmony, I will definitely prove to the brother Jian." The little emperor came to the 2 with a slight doubt. "After all, did you smell anything?" Ding Beichun froze, a Khonshu. Kam immediately turned his head and slowly looked at the vast furnace that had been swallowed by magma. My stove." The wind was rushing, and his figure rose to the storm. He jumped directly into the magma and dragged the huge furnace tripod up. But everything was too late, and the glory in the furnace was no longer gloomy. Ding Beichun shook his hands and slowly opened the furnace tripod. On arrival, countless choking black smoke burst out. "Brother Jian, your sword seems to have been destroyed." He cried with a sad face and reached out to take out an unrecognizable sword embryo from the furnace. Jian Wushuang. "Little Emperor, Beichun, think about how to get beaten." Chapter 47-49. In the end, a severe beating was prevented by Jian Wushuang and did not fall on Ding Beichun's head. "Brother Jian, don't worry. In a year, I will definitely build a real sword that fits perfectly with you," Ding Beichun said with shame. "It's just that those luck will be." Jian Wushuang did not scold him, patting him on the shoulder lightly. "Don't put too much pressure on it. Even if it's gone, the sword is not suitable for me nowadays. You will give me my sword in the future." Although he said so, he still had reluctance and frustration in his heart. Only one person soared from the divine power universe to this ultimate Daanhuan, and the only tarot Excalibur became his sustenance. The familiar luck now dissipated, and the last half-handled Tai Luo Excalibur shattered into fly ash. Ding Beichun nodded heavily. Rest assured, Jianxiong, I Ding Beichun never say anything. Even if the two of us never see each other again, I will definitely send the sword to your hands. Okay, I'm waiting for that day. Jian Wushuang smiled. Brother Jian, I can feel that you and my master have very different swordsmanship, and I look forward to seeing your sword discussion one day. Ding Beichun said, that is definitely a stunning battle. Jian Wushuang heard something, and also came to have some interest, whether from the mouth of the little emperor or Ding Beichun. He heard the mysterious master too many times. When he was about to ask, a wave of supreme coercion appeared quietly behind them. Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan looked back at the same time, and they saw Yu Bo, who looked cold, staring at them. Yu Bo, listen to me. Under the listening typhoon, the two figures firmly tied to the pillar by the Yanli rope, all of them had a look on their faces. In a blink of an eye, Jian Tian was tied back to the listening typhoon again. In order to prevent the two from escaping again, Yanli rope almost didn't tie their heads. I said, Yu Bo, the confinement is not so strict. We haven't done anything in Heaven Realm that hurts the truth. Xiao Dijuan said helplessly, but no matter how he spoke, Yu Bo was like a rock and did not make any sound. Yu Bo, don't shut us up like this. It's better to shut us up in the Tiandao bookstore and read more books. Yu Bo slowly opened his eyes, then waved his hands to loosen the Yanli rope between them. Only go to the bookstore of Heavenly Taoism. If I find that you are going to another place, you will be confined for another 10 years. Xiao raised his eyebrows and pulled Jian Wushuang out of Tingfeng Pavilion again. I can tell you, don't take me to some messy places anymore. In the vast clouds of immortality, Jian Wushuang was dissatisfied. He smiled with his head turned around and said, Relax, I won't take you to messy places this time. The Tiandao Book Pavilion is located in the center of the listening typhoon. Except for the emperor and some elders, it is not open to any Yenxian and fairy in Tianjia. However, after flying in the fairy cloud for half a day, Jian Wushuang saw a towering pavilion located in the light wheel. Nearly 20 overlapping light wheels slowly rotate to surround the pavilion in the middle, which looks sacred and mysterious. The feet fell on the ground, and the little book boys who cleaned the square saw each other after they saw them. There are very few people coming and going in this bookstore, and there are countless volumes in it. The dodgy Tibetan exercises are all in it. The little emperor pushed open the dusty bookcase while explaining. Jian Wushuang heard the words, and his heart was already moving. If it was as he said, maybe he could find some clues in the Tiandao Shuj. Even just learning about some of Dianhuan's situation is much better than turning around like a headless fly. Pushing the door in, the wooden ladder with the first order spiraling upward appeared in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Although it is called a book pavilion, the space here is no less than some ordinary heavens. Here you can see all the mysteries of mystery. Moving forward slowly, the little emperor explained, and at the same time reached out a hand. The hazy clouds on both sides of the wooden ladder receded, revealing a wall of books completely piled by countless ancient books. In the meantime, the hidden volumes are uncountable. Jian Wushuang pulled out a lone book called The Prestigious Mystery. From the entry to the adult stage, the depiction is extremely detailed and extremely rare. After reading through 6 or 7 books in a row, he really felt that this Tiandao Shuj was a treasure house. The secret methods and exercises recorded in each book here are not weaker than those of ancestors. I am afraid that they can be placed anywhere in the sky, and it will trigger a storm. However, these are not what Jian Wushuang wants. He wants to find a book that details the Yanhuan and the realm above Yanxian. After he told this idea to Xiaodaijin, what he got was shaking his head. Do you want to know the entire situation of Dayanhuan? Do you know how vast the whole Desiyu is? Even if it is my emperor, I am afraid it is difficult to understand the situation of Dayanhuan. One side of the heavens is a side of abode in this great Yanhuan. Unless you can feel the existence of those other realms, otherwise you will never understand. If you want to explore, the premise is to have emperor luck. Shao Emperor looked at Jian Wushuang meaningfully. The prerequisite for becoming an emperor is to completely take the step of Yanxian and become Dayanxian. Dayanxian. This is the first time Jian Wushuang has heard of a new realm besides Yanxian realm. The little emperor nodded. Yes, all the elders you saw in the heavenly court before, including my emperor, are in the realm of Dayan Fairy. But there is a difference between Dayanxian and Dayanxian. Although my emperor is also Dayanxian, he has the luck of the emperor, can cast the heaven and control the heaven. Jian Wushuang quickly absorbed these realm problems, and then said, "What realm is there above Dayan Immortal?" I'm afraid that only my emperor can explain this question. As for me, I still haven't broken through to the realm of Dayan Immortal. Shao Dijuan laughed at himself, and then moved forward slowly. Jian Wushuang no longer asks much, and learns that there is a realm of Dayanxian above Yanxian. As for the emperor's control and dominance in Dayanxian, let him subconsciously feel that the realm above Dayanxian is likely to become an emperor before he can know or be promoted. As the wooden ladder under the foot spiraled upward, a book was continuously drawn out by Jian Wushuang, and then read. Just after reading another book of Kendo alone and preparing to move on, a book slightly thicker than other books was reflected in his eyes. Nine Heavens Emperor, Chapter 4750. Intuitively, Jian Wushuang pulled out the ancient book. This is a more practical secret method of fitness, but the title page has never been sealed, and it is obviously not very precious. It's just that he saw a hard object in the middle of the ancient book. Can't wait to turn into the middle. A palm-sized bone armor covered with dry and cracked eyes came into view. Just like the explosion of one Jun Tianlei in his mind, Jian Wushuang shuddered, and the scene in Jingchuan Tiancheng was reappeared. With his instinct, Jian Wushuang directly determined that the sky-shaped bone armor at the moment was definitely the same source as the bone armor encountered by Jingchuan before. He hurriedly fixed his eyes and saw that the dense pattern on the bone armor was slowly moving and gradually formed the word of war. And the words on this piece of bone armor are obviously several times more than the previous one. Just as the third word was about to emerge, Xiaodaijin's voice directly interrupted Jian Wushuang's thoughts. Is this domino important to you? Jian Wushuang glanced at him, nodded heavily, and hurriedly looked at the sky-shaped bone armor in his hand again. However, this time the patterns on the bone armor were all scattered into the original shape, and there is still a half-fractal shape. Bone armor seems to contain a certain energy which can only be seen at first glance and cannot be cracked afterwards. After another experiment, Jian Wushuang had no choice but to find out that it could not be distinguished anymore. Then he looked at the little emperor and said, "Can I take this thing away?" The little emperor shrugged. "You just don't need to burn the fire here. You can pick up the rest." After expressing gratitude, Jian Wushuang carefully put the bone armor into his arms. No matter whether this bone armor has news with Xian Yi, but as long as there is a little possibility, he will not miss it. After seeing this scene, the little emperor flashed an inexplicable expression deep in his eyes, and then he got up and said, "Continue to turn around here again. Anyway, It is too early for 10 years of imprisonment. Jian Wushuang nodded, and at the same time there was a trace of anticipation in his heart. Will there be other Tianzi bone armor in Tiandao Shuj? Walking slowly, he kept glancing at some ancient books with relatively abnormal preservation status. The little emperor, who was 100 steps away from him, looked back and then waved a very cryptic old book from the book wall on the right with a very secret gesture. After an instant, he put the ancient book back on the wall. Brother Jian, if you want to step into the realm of Dian Fairy, the most important thing is to understand the fairy style. This point is simple for you. In the original battle for the peach, in the heavenly realm, you, Brother Jian, relied on an immortal style to suppress the correction of the sun, which is really powerful. Xiaodigen said, once you understand the fairy style, it will herald to break through to Dianxian one day in the future. At that time, I am looking forward to seeing your brother Jian's transformation. Listening to his words, Jian Wushuang gradually understood that in the hidden space of the heavenly realm, the type of horror power possessed by Shizhu was the so-called fairy style. There is not much surprise and joy. The little mountain and river called the fairy style, although powerful, is really too complicated and vast. When he first performed it, he felt that there were hundreds of galaxies. Turning in the consciousness is too much energy. The two of them walked around in this Taoist book pavilion without knowing how. After a long time, Yuba's voice was so cold that there was no emotion. The emperor has an order to cancel the 10-year punishment imposed on both of you, and now return to heaven without delay. What's the matter? The punishment was revoked so quickly. Xiao Dijuan whispered softly. Although the 10-year confinement was only a flash, but it can be revoked in advance, the news made the two a lot easier. Uncle, you stood outside the door of Tiandao Shuj and silently waited for the two of them. After leaving the heavenly Taoist pavilion and leaving the listening typhoon, Jian Wushuang and Xiao Dijuan eventually returned to the heaven realm and heaven court. This feast of heaven has already come to an end, and all the elders with light wheels have successively left heaven. Yenner, don't you really plan to stay by my side? Asked Xinwu Yang, who was sitting on the throne and carrying the godless power. The little emperor shook his head directly. I am still in charge of the sixth heaven realm, and the black mountain crystals cannot be cut off. It is really helpless to stay by the emperor. But Xinwu Yang stopped talking and finally let Xiao Dijuan leave. Looking at his leaving figure, the deepness of Zhen Weiyang's eyes deepened again. Walking out of the heavenly court, the inexplicable pressure on Jian Wushuang's body has disappeared, unspeakable comfort and transparency. At the same time, Chun Qing, Chuanqiu, and others who had been waiting for a long time greeted them. I thought you two were really going to be imprisoned for 10 years, but now they are released after only 2 years, causing me to worry about nothing. Chen Qingmei flirted. Little Emperor shook his head helplessly, then turned to look at Jian Wushuang Road. Brother Sword, and wait for me for a while at the entrance of the celestial realm. I will go to the emperor to say the last goodbye. Jian Wushuang nodded, and then followed Chun Qingqi to the entrance of Chun Qingchao towards the boundary of heaven. Their figure gradually disappeared, and Xiao Dijuan and slender Xiao Pao glanced at each other, and then both returned to the heavens. As the elders of all parties and Yan Xian successively left, the whole heaven was silent again. However, in order to leave a good impression in front of Zhenwuyang, all the emperors were the latest to leave. At this moment, the little emperor who changed into a luxurious suit, accompanied by a thin purple robe, made a departure in front of the heavenly court. As he departed, another emperor wearing a white suit of teeth walked out of the heavenly court. It was the ordinary 5 emperors and Sun Mo. I have been hit by 50 suns, and I feel pain in my back even after a few years. Naturally, the hatred of the little emperor is also added to the bone. At this moment, seeing the little emperor's back, he wished to rush up and give a kick, but his own reason constrained his behavior. Just as Moz tried to teach him something, a white jade-sized object fell from the waist of the little emperor to the ground. Immediately afterwards, the white jade object rolled to the feet of Gongzi Mo. "What is this? The sun gnaws the remaining bone." Young master Mo was puzzled and kicked the slap-sized, cracked white jade bone. Then he stooped to pick up the quirky bone. "My partner, do you know what this thing is?" The white robe Yenxian next to Gongzi Mo shook his head. "I don't know, but if you want to come to Gongzi Yen, you can never carry a useless object with you. This is probably a very important thing for him." Chapter 47:51. Gongzi Maoan said. A curved line was raised at the corner of his mouth. "This idiot even has the habit of throwing up and down, falling into my hands. You never want to take it back." Looking at the little emperor, who was unknowingly missing something and gradually drifting away, Gongzi Mo and the white robe Yenxian beside him all sneered. In the place where he could not see, Xiao Daijin's mouth slightly raised. After going out of the heavenly court and sitting on the imperial court, he looked back at the heavenly court above the heaven of the 9 sides. Maybe in the next Chinese year, everything will change dramatically. As the leader of the battle for the peach in the realm, in addition to the fairy peach, as a reward, the Emperor Zhenwiang waved his hand again and gave dozens of Car's supreme treasures. Fortunately, on this round trip there was no interception, and he returned safely. Returning to Ziyagushan, Jian Wushuang began to investigate the 2 pieces of sky-shaped bone armor and consolidate the fairy style that he realized. The practice above the Yenxian in the Great Yanhuan is difficult and illusory. Today's Jian Wushuang, holding 2 strong ancestral skills, 2 styles of Xinghe Lake and the sword, and the newly acquired fairy-style mountain and river, and the true shadow of the 3 emperors in the bowl of the bottle. Whether it is the bottom card or the bottom line, it is enough for him to gain a foothold in Dayanhuan. He is confident that even facing the Dayan immortals who bear the light wheel, even if they are not enemies, there will never be a move. In the following years, the fairy style was reconsolidated. The more Jian Wushuang felt from the depths, the more scary the stone beads became. This fairy style is a little mountain and river, but it is only a very small galaxy among the countless galaxies in the stone beads. If all were developed, what would it be like? Also, where would this stone be able to stay in the mind of the Giant Sea Sky chapter? All kinds of mysteries are like chaos, firmly entangled with Jian Wushuang, making him very confused, but also growing rapidly unconsciously. While he was studying the sky-shaped bone armor, the little emperor happily visited, carrying the treasure bestowed by the Emperor Wu Wuzhen. At this time, it is already 5 years later. "Brother Jian, after a few years, the breath has calmed down a lot," he said with a smile. Jian Wushuang looked away from the bone armor in his hand and looked at him. "How come Qinqing is not with you?" Little Emperor shook his head slightly. "There are some problems in the Black Mountain in the next 3 days. I asked him to investigate." Hearing Jianshan in the next 3 days, Jian Wushuang's brows were slightly frowned. Obviously there was resistance to it. Feeling the displeasure flashed in his eyes, Ziyao reached out and patted Wushuang's shoulder on the sword, sincerely said, "It's really not what I want to trap those prisoners. You also see my situation. Stone, in exchange for a large number of treasures to cultivate the forces. I am afraid that I have already disappeared in the killing time after time. I assure you that as soon as I break through the Dayan immortal and the Emperor's fortune, he will immediately give them a free body." Jian Wushuang no longer speaks. He still stays here. On the one hand, he made an oath with the little emperor. On the other hand, he believed that the time is far from mature. The clue will be more difficult. taking one side of the heaven and the heaven as the foundation, and then exploring it will be more convenient and easier. Little Emperor also consciously did not continue this topic, but looked at the two bone armor on the case. Brother Jian, how are you looking? Did you get the answer you want? He pointed to bone armor. Jian Wushuang shook his head. How can it be so easy? I'm afraid it won't be until the moment of gathering before you can see through. Is these things important to you? Xiao Dijuan asked the question again. Jian Wushuangdo said, before I figure it out, this thing is not much value to me, but I do need them. The little emperor nodded, then lowered his voice slightly. Since this thing is of some use to Brother Xiong, then I will say it. In fact, this thing is not only seen in the heavenly Taoist pavilion. I had seen this bone armor and jade ornament in one person. Now, I think it should be what you need. Jian Wushuang heard the words and moved his heart. Where? The fifth emperor, the son of ink. The little emperor looked at him and said softly, Master Ink, the name is recounted again in my heart. And Jian Wushuang asked, if he really has it, can I exchange it for something? The little emperor heard the words and shook his head. He is the most arrogant and violent member of the 7 sons under my emperor's seat. In the early years, he enjoyed the city of slaughter. Convergence. I'm afraid that the way of bartering won't work with him at all. Jian Wushuang also frowned slightly, and his son Mo, who left him with a very bad impression in the battle for the peach. After Zizi Mo got Xiantao, he broke his faith and attacked Zizi Qian out of the game. Moreover, his shot is quite fierce, even if his appearance is quite ordinary, but he is probably the leader among the 7 emperors in terms of his scheming and control of the realm. Judging by Xiadaijin's overview of Gongzi Mo, combined with his previous knowledge in the heavens, this Gongzi Mo is obviously a strong and cunning guy. There is still a way to take that bone armor. Xiadaijin's voice was steady, and he looked at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang did not speak, and he hesitated in his heart. According to the previous impression, if you want to get the sky-shaped bone armor in the hand of your son, I am afraid that you really have to take this route. Are you sure that Master Mo really has a bone armor in his hand? Okay, if I lied, I would meet up by then. Jian Wushuang's gaze passed through the temple door and looked at the misty sky outside Zaigyushan. A sky-shaped bone armor is too tempting to him. The reason why he cut off the mud tires and flew to Daanhuan by himself alone. He has a strong intuition they are in Daanhuan. The only clue, although illusory, is never broken. Slowly spitting out a long breath, he whispered, Young Master Mo, where are you? North Celestial State. Xiadaijin replied, Brother Jian has already made up his mind. No matter what the result is, you have to embark on this one. It is good. Outside Zaigyushan, the wind screamed, and the 3 figures stood in a zigzag shape. A young man in the forefront dropped a ranger black shirt and put on a warm and jade-like dress. Chapter 4752. In the transformation of time and time, Jian Wushuang, which was relatively ordinary in appearance, has now become handsome and elegant, and a unique scent of dust is flowing around the body. The ink-colored hair strands bound behind him are sublimated from time to time to produce a pale golden pattern, which is quite the meaning of a dust fairy. Behind him stood 2 tall statues like gods. Chun Qing is quite like a swordsman. His height of more than 1 foot is full of oppression. Even the slightly thin spring and autumn are close to 9 feet. The 3 of them stood together, but the incomprehensible violation had a little meaning. After careful entrustment, the little emperor watched the 3 of them leave. Ma'am, you said, what am I doing right? Nothing is wrong, Your Highness, only success or failure. Between the heavens dotted with countless stars, the 3 bodies flow arbitrarily. This is the first time that Jian Wushuang has been so arbitrary since he came to Daanhuan. The stars above the head step on the flow of clouds, unspeakable and comfortable. The expansive and vast heavens of one side flow slowly under them, and the strange luck between the heavens is like an eggshell, full and mysterious. One celestial domain contains dozens of continental plains, and each of the continental plains is responsible for countless vitality. However, these are only one of the most obscure celestial domains in Oasis. Although he rushed to the northern celestial state, where Gongzi Mo was located, he was followed by Chunqing. This should have been a boring and killing journey, and it was quite interesting unconsciously. The wind and snow, the world is bold. The different planes of the heavens in one side appear in their eyes, in turn. There are 9-headed dragons that are unmatched in the realm of Yenxian, and the super heavens that are entrenched. The rare gems contained in them can't be counted. There is also a terrible background, a prosperous ancestor across 3 or 4 heavens. Of course, there are more sparse creatures and few celestial fields. Chunqing seems to be very familiar with these celestial routes. In the constant rush, he can always reach some sparse, yet extremely interesting celestial planes. Naturally, when rushing across the sky, the least people can do are those who like to hijack. Even if they are born out of nowhere and achieve the status of Yenxian, these people who like to make money are indispensable. Everything brings a lot of fun to the boring journey. How about, hasn't this experience of life rushed for many years? On the vast yellow sand ground, 3 bodies sit on the backs of the dragon horse-like beasts, walking forward. The sky above the head fell down in heavy snow and fell on everyone's shoulder, provoking large and small pieces of snowflakes on one shoulder. Jian Wushuang did not deliberately evaporate with his strength. In his opinion, it is also a more meaningful thing to feel the natural birth and death of all things. Brother Chunqing, do you often travel between these heavens? Jian Wushuang asked. Chunqing, who was sitting on the back of the beast, said with a smile, "It's also a shame to speak. When I hadn't met the little emperor before, I was just a kid. In the beginning, relying on the youth and vigorousness pushing the heavens horizontally, it caused a lot of enemies, and finally had to flee desperately. In this way, after 2 visits, I was able to get acquainted with more than half of the entire heaven. For example, in the northern celestial state we are about to go to, my original son, Mo, who had nowhere to go, didn't want to even enter the heavens. So he suffered a severe beating and almost destroyed my foundation." Speaking of which, Chunqing is still smiling, but from the slightly trembling voice, Jian Wushuang still feels that his intentions are difficult. "So I went to Bai Shengxian's Hu this time. One is to help the Sword Brothers to find what you want, and the other is to calculate the ledger with the sun. That year, when the beating was beaten, I want to take back the profit." Looking at Yi Qingping's Chunqing, Jian Wushuang sighed in his heart. This time, the journey to Baitian Xianzhou, I was afraid that it was completely uneven. Just as the 3 of them laid back and prepared to leave the sky except for the sand sea and snow, the ground not far away suddenly picked up a bulge. Immediately after the separation of sand and stone, a sloppy 3-inch pocket old man came out. Jian Wushuang looked at each other, and then all looked forward. After seeing the 3 men, the sloppy old man who had drilled out of the ground with a look of joy rushed over with short legs. "You distinguished guests and the little old man are polite." Responding to him was a long knife straight out of Chunkia's hands. The long knife broke, but it hung over the head of the sloppy old man and did not cut it off. Rao was so shocked that he sat on his knees and even said nothing. "Speak, what are you waiting for us here?" Chunqing looked at him with interest. The sloppy old man heard the sound and swallowed his throat hard. "Master, little old man is not malicious. just want to use the map in exchange for some rare treasures, and then suddenly appeared and alarmed the three adults. Hearing this, Chen Qing looked at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang did not speak, but looked at the sloppy old man carefully. It is his realm that has no more than half an ancestor level and has not yet entered the strength. And the 3-foot-high figure, the skin exposed outside the clothing, presents a texture like a quicksand. It should be a goblin that steals the luck in this plane of heaven, and there is not much threat. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang lowered his vigilance and said slowly, "What map?" Seeing the murderous intent in the eyes of the 3 men retreating, the sloppy old man breathed out in the bottom of his heart, and then whispered, "I saw the 3 adults' extraordinary strength around their bodies. Apparently they were traveling in the heavens of Yenxian. A roll of maps picked up earlier was handed over to adults in exchange for some rare treasures. As for the map, the little old man couldn't recognize it," he said, and then took out a roll of some broken notes from the sloppy shirt. Seeing Jian Wushuang looked at Chuanxiu. Spring and autumn, with their hearts in mind, directly waved a bag containing thousands of Montenegrin crystals to the sloppy old man. He didn't pay anything in return. He unconsciously opened the bag, and the black mountain crystals were full of eyes. With a thump, the sloppy old man sat down on the ground. You should know that the most common piece of Montenegro crystal is enough for the top repairers who haven't entered into it for more than a few months. It is a treasure in the entire division, not to mention the top crystal produced by Montenegro. The black with silky purple lawns is the top crystal. Even if all the black mountains are added together during the entire downhill day, the mass production is extremely low. Right now, with the appearance of these thousands of top crystals, the richness of the water has formed a faint haze in the space around the sloppy old man. Chapter 47:53. These specifications of the top mountain of Montenegro. Even if you look at the big division, it will definitely become a resource for Yenxian to compete for. However, Jian Wushuang had no idea about this, because before he left, Xiao Dijuan gave him more than 10 rings, and each of the crystals of these specifications in the ring had already burst. As for these Neiji rings stuffed with top crystals, they were all thrown to Chuanxiu for safekeeping by Jian Wushuang. Judging roughly by the spring and autumn period, the top crystals stored in the 10 nawas are the endless mining of Montenegro, with a full year of production. This is why Chuanxiu is so generous. Ignoring the shock of the sloppy old man, Jian Wushuang reached out and ingested the severely damaged note. Starting with a unique texture and accompanied by a weak diffusivity, made him a little puzzled that the reading map seemed to be written on some kind of unique skin. With a wave of his hand, he wiped out the faint diffusive seal on it, and a picture of infinitely vertical and horizontal came into sight. The pattern on the scroll is extremely complex and looks magnificent. It can be seen vaguely that the crisscross pattern is beyond the scope of the heavens. It seems that it is no exaggeration to describe the vastness of the universe, and this map seems to have suffered some kind of destruction. Apart from being able to see the rough outline, most of the subtleties are already undetectable. Obviously, it is a mindless and tasteless. Fuck, this old kid is fooling people. Chun Qing slapped his thigh and looked at the sloppy old man with an angry face. But where can he find his half-body shape in the wild? This old boy dare to lie to my grandfather Chun. I have to dig the ground 3 feet, and I will also give him a bone. Chun Qing rolled up his sleeve angrily, and the situation would stir up Huang Sha. Jian Wushuang reached out to stop him. Although this map seems useless at present, it may come in handy in the future. As for those crystal stones, it should be given to him. Chun Qing was indignant, but he also knew that their primary goal was to go to the northern celestial state, so he put away his anger and went on. However, before leaving this plane, Chun Qing still left a Yanli doppelganger, just waiting for the sloppy old man to appear again, whipping him well. After this episode, the three of Jian Wushuang went on without stopping. Sitting on the back of a beast without any sense of bumps, Jian Wushuang pulled out the map note again, carefully looking through it. On the scroll of the cortex, all the territories are ups and downs, and they are all painted with some kind of dark red paint, which is unspeakable and mysterious. However, since there is no name displayed on the map notes, it is natural that no name can be seen. Jian Wushuang simply didn't study it anymore and put the map notes directly into the bowl of the bottle, out of this piece of heaven, and after running for several months, at the strong request of Chunqing, the three stopped in a tiny heaven. It is a tiny sky, but it contains three independent plane continents. Chung de Yen Huan's luck. Even for the monks who have just entered the practice, Shou Yuan has grown to the extreme, and their own realm will also become the Yen top cultivation with the growth of Shou Yuan. But 99 of these top practitioners stopped here, and the upward immortal realm was cruelly abnormal. Although Jian Wushuang has seen thousands of Yenxian along the way, it is purely because he has approached the top of the power of one side as soon as he entered this great Yanhuan. If he had randomly landed in a continent, in a certain heavenly domain, I am afraid that it would take me tens of thousands of years to reach this stage. At the same time, after looking at the thousands of continents in Jianyu, Jian Wushuang seems to have no mortal claims. Even the most prudent trafficker can practice derivation skillfully, and Shou Yuan also grows accordingly. Stepping on this extremely thin land continent with diffractive power distribution, the bustling streets will also come into view. The number of monks can be directly determined by the strength of yen, and the monks in this mainland plane are very sparse. Occasionally, people who see the practice are just ordinary monks. Alcohol addiction has been committed again. Sword brothers, Chuanqiu brothers, let's go to a clean place for a drink and rest. Chunqing scratched his head and walked across the street with a height of more than 1 foot, which attracted attention from others. Jian Wushuang nodded, and then the three entered a relatively secluded restaurant on the street. Without the responsibility of the wine boy Shao Er, the three of them directly picked up a secluded place by the window and sat down. Chunqing then patted the table. Well, let's drink. There are very few diners in the whole restaurant, only there are so few tables and diners in the corners. Come shout. A tall man dressed in a gray coat with a white par around his waist came out of the back compartment, his face full of flesh. Chunqing heard that he immediately remembered to smash him with 2 slaps, but then he was stopped by Jian Wushuang. Go to Santon Wine. Try to be as fast as possible. Jian Wushuang said softly. Then Chun threw out a piece of the top mountain of Montenegro. Remember, you need good wine. The tall man caught it subconsciously, his eyes gleaming greedily. Okay, no problem. I want whatever wine I want. After that, the tall man stumbled into the back compartment. His mother, a non-influential fish, will dare to be bold and exogenous. Today is not the brother of the sword. You stop, I will definitely smash his brain. Chunqing said angrily. Jian Wushuang looked at the street outside the window and said lightly, one more thing is worse than one less. They are not the owners of this restaurant. Chunqing was stunned and soon felt the meaning of what he said. It didn't take long for the tall man in nondescript clothes to trot in the arms of 2 big altars, and there were 3 or 4 other men behind him. A total of more than 10 altars, and small dishes were placed in front of the 3 of Jian Wushuang. A few VIPs opened their mouths. Enough! The strong man grinned and opened the altar cover carefully before leaving. Chunqing had no doubt about him, and he shot the body directly, and the crystal-clear wine line fell into the 3-person bowl. With only one glance, Jian Wushuang couldn't help laughing. Chuanxiu also reluctantly laughed. This group of stupid things actually mixed medicine powder into the wine. It's up to him. Since the last time I drank in the heavenly feast, I haven't had a sip. Today we are going to drink 1,000 altars. Snoring. Looking at the clear liquor in the wine, Jian Wushuang and Chuanxiu shook their heads helplessly and immediately drank. Achievement of Yanxian realm, the past red dust, have turned into mud tires with strong toxic things, have long been unable to paralyze the fairy body. Even the most illusion-like treasures may not be able to invade Yanxian. Chapter 47:54. Except for the big guys like Juhai Tianzhong, who have transcended the concept of Yanxian, they can manipulate Yanxian's mind, but it is still limited. At present, this diffusive force is thin, and everything that enters the celestial domain of Yan Dingxiu is the phoenix, hairy scales. For Jian Wushuang, they are all like ants, so naturally don't worry. How about the fourth son? Did they drink? Drink and drink, already drinking 3 altars. That's good. After that, we will send another 20 altars in the past and directly turn them over. These brothers and sisters of the family who are not eye-opening. But after all, why is this medicine so poor? Shurten has no medicine yet. I will increase it later. Across the layer of yarn barriers, several rickets were discussing in a low voice with no barriers. Naturally, all these extremely small voices fell into the ears of Jian Wushuang. It was another whole jar of wine. Chun Qing twisted a peanut from the plate with his hand. Brother Jian, have you enjoyed drinking? Put down the bowl. Jian Wushuang nodded. Subsequently, Chun Qing tapped the table with her fingers. Primary 2, check out. I'm coming. Dozens of fierce-looking men ran out of the back compartment, all with sharp knives behind them. With just one glance, Chun Qing raised his eyebrows and smiled, and the peanut twisted in his hand flicked past. Wrapped with strong peanuts, it cut through the space and passed through. Wow. The leading tall man could not even find out the sharp knife behind him in the future, but he only felt an unbearable pain in his belly. Looking down subconsciously, he saw that a transparent hole the size of his head had been opened in his belly. Together with the dozen or so men behind him, they all stood still and looked at the vast hole in disbelief. A bunch of obnoxious things. No longer glancing at them, Chun Qing waved his hand to release Yan Li and crushed them directly into the powder. The restaurant was completely silent. Jian Wushuang, who was sitting in the same place, twisted a peanut and flew towards the ceiling. At once, a whole ceiling with 6 floors was collapsed. Chuanxiu quickly released Yan Li to protect the 3. Immediately after a few screams rang out, and then returned to Xinjing. A moment later, in the lobby of a restaurant with a rubble, a black man lying dead was lying on his back. On the other side of the black body, a woman who was by 5 flowers and had tears in her eyes looked at the 3 men of Jian Wushuang in horror. Due to the scraping of the gravel, there were a few more blood marks on her soft cheeks. A little weak. Looking at this scene, Chun Qing couldn't sit still anymore and got up and kicked the black man who passed out to death. "Girl, are you okay?" Chun Qing said softly with a wave of her hand to untie the rope on her body. The woman moved subconsciously. "It's okay. You were tied here by them?" "No, I am the shopkeeper of this restaurant." A little greeting, Jian Wushuang and Chun Xiu silently looked at Chun Qing, this guy's tongue, Chan Lianhua, and removed the inner defense of this delicate dispenser. 3 distinguished guests. This is a master brew made by the dispensers in return for your life-saving grace. The real restaurant shower put a binaural jade pot on the end and refilled the 3 of Jian Wushuang. The liquid crystal of the wine falls into the glass and emits a light fragrance. Chun Qing's index finger moved, and he drank directly from the cup. At the end, his eyes lit up. Good wine, slightly sweet at the entrance, and a little sour, top grade. After finishing the grooming and coming out of the back compartment, the soft woman heard the words, and her face could not help but flushed with a flush of redness. Xiao Er, who was standing by, heard his words and immediately raised his thumb. Adult tasting time is first rate. This superb wine is made by my own shopkeeper. It is made by my own hands. It is made by chewing rice and naturally fermented. Absolutely. The air condensed. Jian Wushuang silently retracted the palm that touched the cup. The spring and autumn, which had already drunk half a sip, turned green in place. Chen Qing's mouth twitched, and her eyelids jumped involuntarily. You mean this wine is chewing wine? Yes, Juku is the chew of my shopkeeper. Although this shopkeeper's face is soft, making wine with chewing koji is unheard of. For a time Jian Wushuang, secretly relieved in his heart, thanking that he does not have a quick mouth. Otherwise he will have a shadow on the wine. Perhaps it was due to the unnatural appearance of several people, and the feminine woman poked her lips forward to remove the hip flask. Chen Qing hurriedly stopped her. What's wrong? I know you dislike it. The soft woman pursed her lips. It should be different customs. I don't dislike it. Then, Chen Qing directly recaptured the jug and drank it into the spout. The soft woman looked redder and turned and ran into the back compartment. Both Jian Wushuang and Chuanqiu swallowed their throats unconsciously, feeling Chen Qing's strength in his heart. Good wine. After drinking a pot, Chen Qing wiped his lips and then took out a slap-sized, exquisite wine jug directly from his arms and threw it to Xiao Er. Give me full. It doesn't matter whether you chew or not, mainly because someone likes drinking. Chen Qing, who was lying on the wide back of the beast again, took a sip of wine. Traveling outside the heavens, Chuanqiu chuckled and said, Brother Chen, I was going to leave like this. I saw the shopkeeper just now, and I am sad to see your eyes. Chen Qing slowly opened her eyes and closed her eyes again. She is a mortal. I am Yen Xian. There is no result at all. It is better to do nothing. For Chen Qing's words, Jian Wushuang agrees. Although the luck of carrying out the research is extremely great, even for ordinary people who can't practice, Shou Yuan is more than 500 years old. But for Yangxian's numerology that broke the shackles the near-infinite Shou Yuan, perhaps it is a Taoism with hundreds of millions of units. All the previous obstacles will be turned into the past. It is better not to contaminate these causes and effects. Sitting on the back of the heavenly beast, Jian Wushuang's eyes watched the Star River turn, and he couldn't help but evoke the deepest memory deep inside him. As long as the divine power universe was interrupted and he was coming to Dianhuan, he made a decision. This decision is known only to the Nine Tribulation King and was executed by the Nine Tribulation King himself. After Jian Wushuang completely left the divine universe, the Nine-Robed King, who entered the ancestor level, used the road to reason and sealed up one side of the realm, together with the heir of Jian Wushuang in that side. Even if he resolutely cut off the past, but he was ultimately selfish. This is a stupid decision. He did not dare to face the consequences. Chapter 47:55. Moreover, when Jian Wushuang was about to leave the divine power universe, he left his Yanxian Qiyun for 1 point and merged and forcibly elevated the Qiyun in the divine power universe, making the Nine Tribulation King and Daoyan into the ancestral class. He didn't know whether he had done everything right and what irreversible consequences would happen if he made a mistake. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang rubbed his brow. Chen Qing, who was walking side by side with him, murmured quietly at this time, Maybe I might change something. The circulation of the heavens, the vast territory controlled by Zhen Wuyang, is extremely vast. After traveling for more than a few years, Jian Wushuang and his entourage finally came to the North Heavenly State. The so-called North Celestial State is located in the northern part of the Desai region. It is very magnificent. Even from a distance, it looks like a small heaven. The Yanli is rich in clouds, and the fairy cranes fly together with Yunxiao. And Rueguang Cave shoots the rest of the sky. A towering heavenly gate sits in the sky, mysterious. The three figures headed by Jian Wushuang went straight into the cloud. There are several Yanxian guarding the Tianmen, which are much more severe than the 6 emperor realms of the Little Emperor. In order to avoid detours, the three of Jian Wushuang entered directly from Tianmen. At the same time, to prevent being recognized, Jian Wushuang took out the black gold mask from Chuanxiu and pressed it on his face, suddenly turned into a vicissitudes of middle-aged man. Chuanxiu and Qinqing also transformed their faces and overwhelmed their ancestors. As a result, the three seemed to be in the realm without any achievements and entered the North Heavenly State without any difficulty. The Yanxian guarding the Tianmen didn't make trouble and check, but just laughed a few words and then let them in. The clouds are separated, and the magnificent North Tianxianzu, like a fairyland, is fully reflected in the eyes of Jian Wushuang. Brother Sword, let's just go straight in this way. I'm afraid it will attract the attention of the Son of Ink. Chunqing said, looking at the entire northern celestial state. Jian Wushuang said, hurry first. We haven't figured out where the Sun MO is. Let's explore here and make plans. We can only do this. So far, 3 middle-aged men who were not ancestors fell into the North Celestial State. In the prosperous world, there are endless layers of top repairs, even if the immortals riding the cranes are everywhere. The Rueguang projected by the big sun above the head put everything in sight to a layer of fairy rhyme. To avoid attracting attention, the three simply walked into this heavenly city, looking for a method that might be close to Gongzi MO. Look, take a look. The top-level black mountaintop crystals are all produced in the 6-day realm. Just in the most central position of one of these heavenly cities, an abrupt selling call attracted Jian Wushuang's attention. He followed the voice and saw that on the way along the street, one side of the pavilion filled with black crystals caught his eyes. A scruffy Taoist in gray robes is selling, and the roof repairs that are gathered in front of the paving are already more and more. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly and raised some strange feelings in his heart for no reason. I really didn't think that in this northern Tianxianzu there is the circulation of the black mountain crystals. Wasn't it originally heard that Gongzi Mo had already circulated still? When will it be allowed again? Qinqing said thoughtfully, touching his chin. Jian Wushuang did not speak and slowly stepped forward, probing the movement before the paving. The sloppy Taoists saw that the flow of people was gradually converging, but those who advocated were even more struggling. Everyone takes a closer look. It is fully exploited to the 6-day realm and is the top-level black mountaintop crystal. The mass production is terribly low, and there are rumors that the black mountain in the 6-day realm has been exhausted. This top crystal is used one piece less. Looking at the slab-shaped, dark black, irregular crystal, Jian Wushuang confirmed that the sloppy Taoist did not cheat, and each piece was a real top crystal of the Black Mountain. An ancestor-level top repairer moved his heart and asked, "How is the price of a piece?" When the sloppy Taoist saw the price inquirer, he smiled and said, "Today's walk, a piece of Montenegro top crystal. You only need to have one copy of the exercises, no limit to any exercises." The wait NCs of more than 100 famous practitioners were all stunned, and then they all scrambled to throw out a copy of this exercise method in exchange for a piece of black mountaintop crystal. Seeing such a trading scene, Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. You should know that this black mountain Dingjing has great use even in Yanxian realm, and the value of each piece is naturally extremely high. But right now, those half-ancestors who haven't even reached the level of yen can only get one piece with a non-influential exercise. And how can one not be puzzled? And looking at the appearance that the scruffy Taoist refused, the sword Wushuang vaguely felt that he was no longer trading in equal amounts, but was generally completing a certain task. The scene was a bit chaotic for a moment. Jian Wushuang saw that several Yenxian were involved in the transaction, but it was only half the time of the incense sticks. This pavilion, filled with the top crystals of Montenegro, was empty. Jian Wushuang, who was watching from afar, saw that with the rapid departure of all the top repairs, the smile on the face of the scruffy Taoist disappeared, and an impatient look was replaced. He directly rolled nearly 100 exercises in the spread, and then flicked those exercises into the sleeves of his robe. After doing all this, he quickly walked into the air and left. "Brother Sword, have you noticed something is wrong?" Qin Qing on the side asked in a low voice. Jian Wushuang said nothing. "Follow him and see what he plans to do." Qin Qing and Chuanqiu nodded at the same time, and then the three figures quickly followed. But he didn't keep up with it for a long time, and the sloppy Taoist breath disappeared without a trace, and no one like Jian Wushuang could find it. At the same time, there was a loud hawking which came out from another heavenly city, Jian Wushuang. Even if it was decided that the three people would be dispersed as much as possible to explore how many hawkings in this northern celestial state paving of spar in Montenegro, with the soles of the feet on the ground, a youth-like ancestor-level repairer has already opened the paving and started selling. This time the Montenegrin crystals on the paving are lower in grade, but the most common Montenegrin crystals, the number of which exceeds 100. However, even the most common Montenegrin crystal was quickly robbed. After watching this scene, when Jian Wushuang was about to set off to catch up with the young man, Chun Qing and Chun Qiu also rushed back from the rest of the city. "Brother Sword, there are really strange. Every city has at least one street vendor selling black mountain crystals," Chun Qingning said. Jian Wushuang didn't open his mouth. Combining with Chun Qing's previous doubts, he had already discovered that these vendors selling black mountain crystals seemed to be carrying out some kind of secret and relatively easy to detect momentum. Chapter 4756. It can represent the black mountain crystal, and it is inseparable from this thing, the Yenxian of the entire real Wuyang seat under the sky. And even the Dingxiu know that there is only one person's iota Junzizi yen. At present, in this northern celestial state, there are several paving places selling black mountain crystals, which seems to be doing some subconscious momentum. Jian Wushuang has been consciously aware of the undercurrent of the calm lake. This time, I'm afraid our whereabouts will be more secret. Let's stay close to Gongzi Mo first. Jian Wushuang whispered. Chuanqiu glanced at the young monk who was packing away. "Is there something happening?" He shook his head, and then said, "The current situation is unknown. Follow him first to find out." Chun Qing and Chuanqiu nodded. At this time, the young monk had already packed it up, but instead of leaving, he carried his hands and toured with great interest in this heavenly city. The three of Jian Wushuang also kept a certain distance and explored his whereabouts. The young monk, with a floral bag on his shoulders, dressed in a decent but decent gown, seemed to travel a long distance and came to Xianzhou to experience the pilgrimage. Jian Wushuang was 100 meters behind the young monk, watching his every move with his consciousness. But this situation did not last long. Soon, with hundreds of cranes coming suddenly, the mighty flying over the sky from the top of the head disturbed Jian Wushuang's eyes. After the immortal crane soared away, there was still a half-shadow of the young monk in front. The heart said badly. Jian Wushuang looked behind him. Chun Qing and Chuanqiu grasped each other's heart, and each of them walked towards different rushes. The disappearance of this young monk's body means that the clues are interrupted. In this sensitive season, Jian Wushuang will never allow a half spread. The three figures were traced in different directions. The soaring roof repairs gradually became sparse, and the spring and autumn rushed forward along a street. At the same time, the pavilions on both sides of the road began to blur. The anxious spring and autumn, completely unaware of the changes that occurred around him. When he suddenly burst into a crisis, it was too late. A broken flower, wide cloth suddenly strangled between the neck of spring and autumn from behind, and then an irresistible momentum came. Suddenly hit by this, he was so dark that he almost passed out, even if he wanted to move his finger. And the figure holding the floral broadbuller to hold the neck of spring and autumn is the young monk who disappeared before. At this moment, he only has a sharp killer in his eyes, an unprecedented huge force of coercion, which can never be controlled by the ancestral top repair. One hand controls spring and autumn, the other carries the palm of the general trend and points like a knife, without hesitation, to his origin. However, at this time, the change is steep. Laugh. The sound of gold and iron clashes resounded, and the enchantment laid by the young monks shattered, and a little cold light came. The young monk was aware of this scene, and the palm that was originally intended for the origin of the spring and autumn changed suddenly, and the momentum of the force was directly blasted forward. The two collided, sending out an emptying shock that canceled each other out. A middle-aged figure with a vicissitudes face appeared later, holding an invisible sword and staring at him sharply. The four eyes met, and the murderous opportunity that broke out in the eyes of the young monk soon disappeared. And then suddenly through spring and autumn passed, taking advantage of this empty space to escape directly. Jian Wushuang reached out to catch spring and autumn, gazed forward, and did not catch up. Cough, Brother Jian, you saved my life again. Chuanqiu clutched her neck, and her bluish-purple complexion gradually recovered. Just in the short confrontation just now, Jian Wushuang judged that the other party's strength was absolutely impossible, and it could never be the ancestral realm seen before. If the young monk is determined to fight, I am afraid that he will also be hit hard. At this time, Qingqing also came and saw this scene, and quickly asked, "How did you catch that guy?" Jian Wushuang shook his head. "I'm afraid we will have some changes this time." "Can they be the eagles under the sun's ink seat?" Qingqing frowned. "If the eagle dog under the ink master is okay, he is afraid. He is not." Jian Wushuang said slowly. Qingqing reminded, "Brother Sword, let's get out of here first. It wouldn't be great if we bumped into Master Mo's men." Jian Wushuang nodded. At the moment, they are already at the top of a fairy mountain far away from the Sky City. The young monk seemed to have a certain kind of magical power. When the scenes in the eyes of spring and autumn were already blurred, he was actually lured out of Tiancheng. If it were not for Jian Wushuang to feel that his breath was moving away, and to rescue him in time, Chuanqiu would never survive. The three bodies then left without leaving any traces. After Jian Wushuang decided to stay close to Gongzi Mo, the three of them stayed in a heavenly city in the northern celestial state. Brother Sword, otherwise during this time, we will first find out where in the Xianzhou your son is. At that time, you won't be unprepared if you hit him directly. In a Xianfu pavilion, Jian Wushuang, who was sitting against the window, was quietly listening to Qingqing's lonely complaint. At the end, he said lightly, "Let's wait a while. Let's not go to the town to kill my son. If we have a choice, try not to fight. That being said, I am afraid that I will enter the palace of Gongzi Mo, and I have no choice." Qingqing sighed. Chuanqiu clutched his neck and said, "No matter what, you must be careful. I also feel that we are not quite flat this time." The three of them were talking. The ground quietly rolled up a dust of dust, and then the 7 bodies were dressed in caskets, wearing Dujia's figure, and stepped into this Xianfu pavilion in turn. Jian Wushuang's gaze also locked these visitors for a moment. Looking through Dou Li, he saw that these 7 old customers were dressed in Middle Ages. All of them were middle-aged with indifferent dull eyes in their eyes, as if everything outside was not related to them. After entering the Xianfu pavilion, the 7 old guests did not stay much, but walked to the top-floor compartment to rest. Don't say that these undressed hats are dressed in style, and they have a sense of independence in the past. Chun Qing looked at the back of the old customers and analyzed. Jian Wushuang did not speak. His eyes were already attracted. He saw that the old guests in the clothes, under the clothes, all had a kind of secret aura of extreme sharpness. That kind of unique sharpness. Only Jian Wushuang can perceive it keenly. All good swordsmen, interesting. An old guest headed. It seems that all induction very secretly cast a glance in his direction. The 4 eyes are opposite. Only for a moment, the old customer withdraws his gaze, and then all the 7 figures disappear into the compartment. Chapter 4757. These old customers who hide the breath of kendo give Jian Wushuang a very strange feeling. But he didn't think much about it. After all, it is possible to live in this magnificent north celestial state, even if there is a sword fairy. After a brief discussion, the 3 of them went back to the room to rest. At Chun Qing's strong request, the 3 men were squeezed into a box. Jian Wushuang, who turned over and sat on the window sill, shook his head helplessly. He gradually found that when he was with Chun Qing, he was more and more like the one who started in the end of the world and wandered through the world. The bad habits of eating, drinking, and sleeping should be quit in time. After taking a swig of beauty, after the so-called chu wine, Chun Qingkai lay on the bed and began to sleep. Spring and autumn, just after the interception that had no backhand at all, he practiced even more desperately. At the moment, except for the extremely powerful 8-armed wrath in his hands, he has no magical powers. Even in the face of an ordinary Yenxian, he will fall into great passiveness. Ascending to Yenxian realm is an urgent matter. Otherwise, he will never be able to catch up with Jian Wushuang. For ordinary Dingxiu, the achievement of Yenxian realm may be an illusory imagination, but spring and autumn are different. The blood of the former emperor flows on his body, even if the emperor's luck brought to the extreme. It is enough to let him step into it. Yenxian realm. The whole Xianfu pavilion was very quiet, and even with the Sky City, it seemed to have fallen into silence. Among the immense clouds of Xianyun, the big day that brought Ruiguang to the entire Xianzhou gradually gathered Guanghua. The night that belongs to the northern celestial state is approaching. Sitting on the windowsill, Jian Wushuang began to sit down. Although he seemed to be sitting enlightened, his 5 senses of supernatural power were still observing around him keenly. As the cloud curtain gradually thickened, just as Jian Wushuang was about to take back his mind and prepare to go deeper into sitting, a subtle voice made him open his eyes again. He was familiar with the sound, the end of the sword. Inexplicably, Jian Wushuang thought of the mysterious 7 musketeers I saw earlier. It seemed to confirm his conjecture. And then several breezes suddenly rose. Jian Wushuang subconsciously looked over his head and saw a total of 7 figures directly flying into the sky, but disappeared into the cloud completely in an instant. He seemed to have some feelings and quickly awakened Chun Qing and Chunqiu, and then stepped longitudinally, his figures straight up to Jiu Shao, rising the cloud top, accompanied by the sun and the stars, but alone lacked the breath of the 7 figures just now. Brother Jian, did you find anything? Chun Qing and Chunqiu followed him, standing on the top of the cloud. Jian Wushuang did not speak, but used his consciousness to deduce the shrinking mountains and rivers, and soon looked at the sky dome behind him. The 7 previous figures were weird. Let's keep up with the investigation, he said quickly, and then walked forward. Sure enough, traveling hundreds of thousands of miles, Jian Wushuang probed the breath of the 7 swordsmen from the clouds. With the breath, everything becomes simple. The 3 of them swiftly traveled along the breath of the clouds. Blocks of magnificent heavens were left behind, and these were just the tip of the holy north celestial state. As the way forward, the strength of Yen became more and more pure, and Jian Wushuang began to wonder in his heart. He had a hunch that the place where the 7 swordsmen were going was faintly similar to them. Water dial sees the moon, cloud dial sees the sun. As the breath of the 7 swordsmen suddenly disappeared through the layers of Yanli clouds, a magnificent fairy state came into their eyes. Xianzhou, which exhibits a diamond-shaped base, hangs high in the sky. From every corner, there is a jade belt waterfall which falls on the sky, and on the side of this Xianzhou there is another huge green tree, and a golden cage is hung on the top of this giant tree. In the golden cage, a round of red birds carrying a halo. The entire Xianzhou is very bright. Such a magnificent scene, although it is not comparable to the heavenly court where Zhenliang is located. It is no exaggeration to be called a small heavenly court. Here, wouldn't it be the residence of Gongzi Mo hidden in the clouds? Chun Qing looked at Xianzhou and murmured. Jian Wushuang nodded. Except for Master Mo, no one would have such energy and could live in such a fairy state. Chun Qing frowned slightly. If this is really the residence of Master Mo, I'm afraid he has already made a plot. From the current point of view, this magnificent Xianzhou, whether it is from the layout or the pattern of imprisonment of Jinwu, has a hidden meaning to the standard of heaven. I am afraid that any sighted person can guess it, the ambition behind this Xianzhou master. It seems that I'm going to clear the air for the little emperor. Chun Qing involuntarily tightened the real sword around his waist, and there was already a murderous intention in his eyes. I advise you not to take this idea. Even if the son Mo is again, you can't intervene. Don't forget that his old son is Zhan Wuyang. Jian Wushuang said quietly and added a sentence at the end, unless absolutely necessary. Chun Qing grinned. Get orders. Mix into it first, then make a plan, Jian Wushuang said, and the back figure was the previous one, and went to the small heavenly court. Immortal rhythm, this Xianzhou portal is worth a lot of Yenxian. However, these Yenxian guards are all sleepy now. 3 ghost-like figures flew into Xianzhou in an instant, only driving the breeze. This dress is so tight. I'm afraid it'll be cracked during the follow-up. On the bluestone paved avenue, 3 guards in uniform dress walked side by side. The headed sword Wushuang changed its appearance again from the original downcast middle-aged man to a young heroic guard. Both Chun Qing and Chuanqiu changed into the faces of the guards who had been previously stunned. Chun Qing, who was standing tall, grumbled while carefully guarding the tight guard clothing. Being in this quiet fairyland, Jian Wushuang felt very carefully the sudden situation that might happen around him. Just then, a sudden cold drink sounded from behind. Stop! The 3 of them froze in place, and Chun Qing had already put his palm on the hilt of his waist, and just waited until the situation was wrong, and then beheaded and beheaded. Jian Wushuang turned around slowly, staring at the guards without fear. You are on duty. Why do you want to go to the Temple of 5 Suns now? One of the middle-aged patrolmen asked. Time on duty has passed, and now we are going to the temple of Wu Gongzi to be on duty. Jian Wushuang replied. Later, the middle-aged patrolman asked a few more questions, and he just answered the questions before leaving several people to leave. Brother Jian, it's really tall. How do you know these problems? I'm blind. Fortunately, I didn't reveal the stuffing, so go ahead. Chapter 4758. This is located in the middle of the north of Xianzhou, a small fairy state, and there are thousands of fairy buildings. The Temple of Heaven where the young sun Mo is located is in this little fairy state. The Jinwu, which controls the light and darkness of the northern celestial state, is kept in a golden cage on the hibiscus tree for the owner of the temple to watch and drive. The ring of thousands of cranes, soaring and resting in the clouds, from time to time turned into a fairy, lying in the clouds, cast curious eyes toward Jian Wushuang and others. After stepping into this little fairy state, Jian Wushuang saw the magnificent temple next to the hibiscus tree at a glance. 3 figures stepped on the bluestone avenue, close to the Temple of Heaven. The sun is shining, Xianzhou will be night. Soaring forward, Qianglu of thousands of immortals was trampled under his feet, and the magnificent heavenly temple was gradually clear. The sole of the foot fell on the Hao Miao square. Jian Wushuang and Chen Qingqiu at the side looked at each other, and then bowed their heads into the Temple of Heaven. Yu Yun rides on the wind, and there are some immortal music coming out of the Temple of Heaven. From time to time, there are more than a dozen maids dressed in luo sang, holding the silver plate in hand, walking under the jade corridor. In the vast lotus ponds on both sides of the Temple of Heaven, there are koi boys, lying among the lotus petals, playing in the water boringly. Seeing a few new faces, they all hurriedly moved over to Yunyu. Go, let me go away. Uncles are doing business. Come back and play with you. Chun Qing waved his arms, constantly driving the koi boys around him. These little guys may be too bored in the lotus pond. Instead of returning after hearing Chun Qing's words, they giggled and all lay on him to interact. In order to prevent multiple incidents, Jian Wushuang and Chuanqiu had to help take these little guys off Chun Qing's body and throw them into the lotus pond one by one. At this moment, an ethereal but with a bit angry voice suddenly sounded in this Temple of Heaven. I said, "Those 3 silly big guys, do you treat those little guys like that? Do you know that they are all my boys?" Jian Wushuang stiffened, and then subconsciously looked at the place where the sound was made. I saw that at the top of the eaves of the temple that day, a figure in a leno skirt looked at him with a smile. 2 of them hanging from the gauze in the air, like a faint moonlight, with a pair of petite jade feet shaking in the air. The silver bell between the ankles gave a very clear sound. The long wind blew, blowing her veil, revealing a look of shock. And then those koi boys thrown into the lotus pond were all transformed into their original shapes and floated to the mysterious and beautiful woman's body. The figure immediately stood up, a pair of jade feet stepped on the colorful glaze, and there were koi swimming around the body, looking at the beautiful scene where immortal qi is about to reach the critical point. Jian Wushuang's eyes are more and more vigilant. He unconsciously reached out his hand and touched his waist, but he was surprised that his Tailuo Excalibur had been blown up by Ding Beichun in the heaven of the sword. "Hey, ask you guys, 3 silly big men." Looking away from Xianyun, a pair of Xing looked at the 3, and finally fell on Jian Wushuang's face. "Brother Jian, what are we going to do next? We're not going to expose it." Chuanqiu lowered his head anxiously. "It's definitely not going to reveal anything. How big a girl's house can make waves." Chun Qing whispered, "Brother Jian, in my opinion, ignore her. We rushed in." Jian Wushuang then spoke, and his voice became somewhat complimented. "Xianjia, our 3 brothers first entered the Temple of Heaven on duty and did not understand the truth. If they annoy Xianjia, please ask Hai Han." The woman standing at the eaves of the Temple of Heaven heard the words, flew straight down the wind, and fell in front of Jian Wushuang, the whole body surging around. Jian Wushuang opened the distance without trace. It turned out to be the first time on duty, And I said, when you stupid guys appeared in the temple of heaven, a voice of anger came from under the veil. But this is not a reason. You just bullied my boy under the seat, and now I punish you all to jump into the lap of the lotus pond. Chuanxiu and Chunqing looked at each other, and their faces were awkward. Jian Wushuang replied, I'm afraid it's a bit wrong. When we were on duty for the first time, we put on a wet suit, which would damage our appearance. When the woman gathered, she wanted to say something, but then there was a call. Mother, your son called you. A maid stood in front of the temple of heaven and respectfully said. The woman who gathered the yarn did not answer, but looked at Jian Wushuang. 3 people. Fortunately, you will be spared this time. After she finished, she ran barefoot to the temple of heaven. Chunqing was indignant when she went completely away. If it weren't for the sun's sight, I would let the lady know what cruelty is. Jian Wushuang did not speak. He looked around the temple in a circle and was planning to make the next exploration. The woman who had disappeared quietly showed her figure from under the pillar again. You still do nothing. All come with me, she said quietly, her tone unquestionable. The 3 looked at each other and then entered the temple of heaven together. The door of the hall slowly opened, and a warm fragrance came. In the middle of the magnificent temple, a large incense burner spit out clouds of smoke. There are 18 giant columns on both sides of the mountain and sea scrolls. There are 18 seats next to each giant column for the feast. At the same time, there are hundreds of dancers dancing in the clouds and the extravagant scene of singing and dancing. After stepping barefoot into the giant hall, the woman with the veil directly stepped on the ground flowing clouds, like a fairy growing randomly between heaven and earth, and ran wildly. Jian Wushuang's gaze locked the deepest part of this temple in the first time. There, the 5 emperors in extravagant Chinese costumes. The son of Mo is sitting in the first position, drunkenly admiring the dancing postures of the dancers. Yu reading books, www. Akanshu. He didn't consciously get up until he saw the girl with a light fairy deer coming, and was happy. Silverbell, you are here. The maids on both sides brought a luxurious dress and fur to her dressing. Every day is the same old style, and I'm tired of seeing it. The veiled woman, named Yinling, wrapped in a white fur, sat on the side of the sun's ink and pouted. Gongzi Mo seemed excited about Yinling's arrival with a little embarrassment. Okay, don't watch. They'll see the competition later. At the end of the conversation, Master Mo turned his head impatiently and waved his hands, and the dancers withdrew. In a moment, there were more than 20 handsome young men with red lips and white teeth walking slowly up the center of the temple. Brother Sword, have you ever heard that the sun is good at men? Looking at the mysterious face of Chunqing, Jian Wushuang looked at the question mark. Chapter 47:59. Chunqing smiled secretly again. This is not groundless, but it has long been rumored that the son Mo Yoshi is male, and he once recruited Tianjiao teenagers in the entire big domain and sent them to his northern celestial state. It's cured, so you can enjoy the beauty at any time. For example, right now, these handsome young men may be the male pets he maintains. Although Jian Wushuang still has no expression on his face, it is already cold in his heart. Looking at the more than 20 handsome teenagers who came out, there was a touch of imperceptible softness between each eyebrow, which seemed to indirectly corroborate what Chunqing said. Whatever he likes has nothing to do with us. Next, we will immediately withdraw after finding the zigzag bone armor. Try not to have disputes. Jian Wushuang whispered. Chunqing and Chunqiu both nodded and then stopped talking. The identity of the 3 of them is the guard of Xianzhou who came to the Temple of Heaven on duty. Together with their faces, they can be easily transformed into ordinary ones. They are almost impossible to find if they are thrown in the crowd. Therefore, they stood by the giant pillars on both sides of the hall and acted as guards. Originally, Jian Wushuang did not intend to enter the giant hall, but was about to turn around this temple. But in the end, the steps were interrupted by the Silver Bell Mother, standing on the side of the giant pillar. He turned his gaze to the center of the temple, the handsome young men who were demonstrating sword dance at the moment. The so-called sword dance is more ornamental than practical, although each of them has a stable sword, but lacks decisiveness and resoluteness. It is obviously used for watching. Although all these handsome youths are rare seedlings with swords, Jian Wushuang obviously has no love for love. The most important thing to practice kendo is the innate energy in your heart since childhood, which is the foundation. Ultimately, all things are big, and various Taoist laws are emerging one after another. Although the swordsmanship is special, it does not escape the rules of the avenue. Natural swordsmanship will also come down with the passage of time. These naturally can't have the slightest image of Jian Wushuang's state of mind. Surrounded by a silver bell, ringing softly, the drunken son, Mo, smiling at the sword dance performance, seemed extremely satisfied. It's so boring, it's so boring. Yinling, who sat in the top position, was dissatisfied. The son Mo Wenyan drew back his gaze. What's wrong with Yinling? Dissatisfied. Yinling pursed her lips. Of course not satisfied. How many times have you seen it again and again? Do you know? And do not change something new. Well, according to you, you can do whatever you say, said Mo Chong, the son. Yinling drummed his mouth, as if thinking of some new tricks, and then glanced into the hall. Jian Wushuang's heart said badly. His figure didn't even have time to retreat. He heard a slightly excited voice. It's just you, the stupid guy before you went out. Yinling got up. Her slender hands pointed at him coldly. Jian Wushuang was silent, so he had to walk daringly to the center of the temple. The haze in Gongzi's ink eyes dissipated somewhat. He saw the ordinary guard standing in the middle of the temple, and he always felt a familiar atmosphere. But he didn't think much about it. After all, in the current season, it is the most important thing to be able to win the favor of Yinling. After pointing out Jian Wushuang, Yinling slowly looked around again, and finally found a young guard who was not too conspicuous in the other side. It's just you two. I can feel that you two are guys with extraordinary skills. It's better to play a martial art here. Yinling's mouth twitched a smile. While waving his sleeves, 2 coats with horse training, he pulled out 2 real swords and threw them at the two. Reaching for the real sword, Jian Wushuang's brows were slightly wrinkled. He didn't like this feeling very much, especially the feeling of being criticized by others. If it were not for the moment, I am afraid that Jian Wushuang had already killed Yinling. After all his emotions were settled, his eyes turned to the young guard, who was also called out. Jian Wushuang didn't see all the emotions in his eyes, as if he didn't remember everything in his heart. Go ahead, please make sure to go all out. If it's not exciting enough, maybe there will be punishment. Yinling sat down and smiled. Chun Qing, who was hiding next to the giant pillar, gritted his teeth and said, Damn, if I have to make a last resort, I will kill this woman first. Also count me. Chunkius' eyes were cold, as if he was already preparing, and only after Jian Wushuang sent a signal, he immediately started his hands. At this moment, in the entire grand hall, only Jian Wushuang and the young guard stood against each other, like Yuanzhu Yuezhi. He stood with his sword raised, and his breath converged, like a supreme sword intention to be opened by a Tibetan front. In the face of any potential enemy, they keep their best. This is the habit that Jian Wushuang has cultivated in the long journey of cultivation. Even at the moment, he did not relax. The young guard standing with the same sword standing in the distance should have belonged to the youth-like, clear eyes, and at a certain moment showed a very inconsistent old state. Naturally, this momentary change was also captured by Jian Wushuang. However, without waiting for him to think, the young guard took the lead in violently raising his sword straight down. Sword Wushuang raised the sword to deal with it, and the two blades handed over, making a brittle sound. It was just a moment of confrontation, and the thick sword was scattered and frightened. Although it was a fight, it has actually fought 1,000 times, in a flash. Jian Wushuang secretly panicked. When can even ordinary Yangtzean swordsman be able to compete with his own rivals? Without thinking at all, the young guard slashed with a sword, and in a very indifferent face, there was a touch of imperceptibility. A sword came out, forcing him to open several positions. Jian Wushuang's eyes were a bit cold. The young guard was hiding under the indifferent expression, and the killer that he tried to control was emerging little by little. At this point, he began to be a little sure that the young guard at the moment could never be the guard of the northern celestial state. In other words, this guy at the moment, like the three of Jian Wushuang, should have stolen in as an identity. An uncertain idea rose from Jian Wushuang's mind. The two real swords collided fiercely again, and the aftermath of the martyrdom produced by the collision point directly wiped out the clouds of smoke in the entire temple of heaven. The whole Buddha's strength was pressed against the real sword in his hand, and Jian Wushuang's figure approached the young guard. No matter what your purpose is, it's best not to hit my mind on me. The young guard's figure stunned slightly a pair of turbid eyes, with a doubtful and scrutiny glance at Jian Wushuang, and then suddenly withdrew more than 10 feet. Chapter 4760. The Temple of Heaven was silent, and everyone looked at this scene with breathless breath. The sword, good swordsmen, when they saw this almost instantaneous confrontation, were all frowning. Because of the confrontation between the two of them, the sword intentions that escaped from them were absolutely uncommon, especially the sword spirit that flew up in a flash, and even those who approached felt a kind of sensational, killing intention of being cut by the soul. Sword stood without a sword, and it didn't seem to plan on the next battle. The young guard did not intend to fight anymore, and after the sword was turned around, he was ready to return. "Stop! Did I ask you to go back?" An icy voice sounded, and the youngest son sitting in front of him protruded in front of his body. His drunken eyes were full of coldness. It seemed that the next moment would be a violent murder. The figure that was about to return was also paused at this moment. A pair of British eyes looked at him, and then arched his hand. "Point to the end. If I hit it, I am afraid I will make a joke. If the son insists on watching, why not let me wait for some brothers to compose a sword dance for the son?" The young man, Emo Wenyen, looked at the heroic guard, who looked down. His face relaxed. "Well, if you are not satisfied with me, it will take your head." The young guard promised, and then turned to look behind him. A total of 6 guards in uniform dress walked out slowly from one side. Jian Wushuang saw this situation. His brow angle jumped slightly, and he stepped back without trace. "Brother Jian, is there something?" Chun Qing asked in a low voice. "If the situation is not right, just run," he whispered, his eyes flashing dignifiedly. At this point, Jian Wushuang was completely certain that the 7 guards were the 7 swordsmen he had seen in the Xianfu Pavilion in the northern celestial state. Right now, they all sneaked into this temple, and the goals seemed to be all running to the son Emo Chinqingqiu, and the two heard it and were all cautious. They knew that Jian Wushuang's character would never be untargeted. He said that there is a situation, then there must be a situation. For a time, Chun Qing set his sights on the center of the temple, the 7 seemingly ordinary figures. There is not too much nonsense. The 7 figures are spread out side by side in the shape of a character, and then the 7-handed sword with entangled force points straight ahead. The atmosphere in the entire temple began to change subtly. Jian Wushuang and Chen Qingqiu moved towards the gate of the Temple of Heaven without any trace, but they were stopped by the silver bell girl, sitting on the head. At this moment, the sword dance composed of 7 people began. Taking the leading young guard as the guide, the 7-handed sword moved and moved in the hall. The cloud smoke from the huge censer in the center of the temple was also transformed into various scenes by these swords. It may look like a dragon leaping into the sea of clouds, or it might look like a tiger lying on its back, changing a lot. Seeing this magnificent scene, sitting on the side of the temple, or the Yenxian could not help clapping and applauded. The youngest son, Mo, who was sitting at the head, nodded frequently and seemed to be very satisfied with the sword dance of these 7 people. And Jian Wushuang seemed a little uneasy because he had just discovered that this 7-member team had a bigger and more powerful force. Although it was only revealed for a moment, Jian Wushuang was immediately shocked. It is very likely that those levels of Yanli power have transcended Yenxian realm. Are they going to assassinate Gongzi Mo? He seemed to think of something, and then looked at him. Unconsciously, the 7 figures leaned forward. Yunyan gradually spread throughout the hall, making every roof repair seem to be on top of the cloud, fluttering in immortality. At the moment, the son of the sun was gradually excited, and the eyes were even more drunk. In the 7-man formation, the youngest guard in the front, holding a real sword, is very powerful. In the eyes, which were slightly old, quietly showed a sense of more and cold killing. At the next moment, he jumped up suddenly, stepped on the clouds and smoke, and under the gaze of all Ding Xiu and Yen Xian, he shook the real sword tightly and stabbed at the sun. The air seemed to stagnate, and everything that was about to happen happened at this moment. A sword that lingered on the supremacy, without any hesitation to stab him. But at this time, the change suddenly appeared, and the space in front of Gongzi Mo collapsed without a sign, and even changed the position of the sword stabbed with force. The sword that originally pierced the sun's ink head was forced to move, and finally, without any resistance, it pierced the cheekbone and nailed it firmly on the temple chair. The screams rang loudly, and blood poured out. The whole left side of Gongzi Mo was directly minced. The real sword penetrated half of his head, and the tip of the sword went straight into the hall chair for more than an inch. But this blow didn't kill him at all, and there was even a distance from the fairy source in his brain. One blow failed to kill. The young guard came down with one of his palms and vowed to completely kill the son, Mo, but the ensuing great coercion suppressed his momentum. A black robe came out from behind the son, Mo, and also stretched out a palm, smashing towards the young guard. The 2 forces collided, and a burst of loud noise erupted. Then the young guard looked like a kite with a broken thread and flew out. At this moment, all Ding Xiu and Yen Xian reacted and manipulated Yanli to encircle the 7 people. And the 6 figures standing in place were all moved, and all were like ghosts. After quickly catching the young guard, they let go of their hands and feet to kill. One of them was tall and thin, his palms closed on his chest, and then it was suddenly torn apart. The infinite strength was torn the space directly, together with more than 20 top repairers who gathered around it, all turned into powder. There was another figure, the palm of his hand clenched into a fist, and he hit the ground with a punch. Boom! The entire temple shook, and then a series of fine cracks cracked the white jade floor. The 6 forms of body shape all broke out the most terrifying power at this moment. Everyone has the terrible power to kill Yen Xian easily. At this point, the entire temple was in chaos. As early as the first moment of the riot, Jian Wushuang took the lead in responding, directly reaching for the door of the hall and running directly with the 2 of them. This kind of chaos, which is not controlled at all, is a little careless, and I am afraid that even he will drink on the spot. Brother Sword, this is too exciting. The young man Mo seems to be dying today. Among the 3 bodies that fled quickly in the void, Chen Qing said excitedly, "It is all reincarnation. Someone came to assassinate." Jian Wushuang heard that the body that had fled quickly had stopped suddenly. Looking back at the temple of heaven that was about to have signs of collapse, he finally said, "No, I will go back." Chun Qing was surprised for a while, then hurriedly said, "Brother Sword, are you kidding me? Gongzi Mo is already a lifeless man." Chapter 47:61. Jian Wushuang gazed at him. "Young Master Mo, he can't die now, and the news of his death pattern is broken. Isn't Leazai's bone-shaped armor more important than life?" Qin Qing was also anxious about the kind of breath in the temple. He was more clear than Jian Wushuang. It was because of his clarity that he wanted to prevent Jian Wushuang from dying. "Of course, life is not important," Jian Wushuang smiled, "but this is the best situation right now." At the end of the speech, he went straight forward, without fear of the chaotic collapse of the temple. "Brother Qingqing, might I be afraid?" Chuanxiu raised an eyebrow and smiled, and then caught up with Jian Wushuang without hesitation. Who is afraid? This small scene can deter me, Qingqing." Qingqing anxiously, then clenched his teeth to keep up. In the chaotic temple, the top repair and Yanxian are continually dying. The ground is completely collapsed, and the entire temple is in a shaky state. The 7 bodies are like 7 rocks, and no Yanxian can shake them. A sword penetrated the cheekbones of the face, and the son Mo, who was nailed to the temple chair, stopped howling, grasping the blade tightly in his hand, and pulled the entire sword out of his head. At the moment, the ink of the sun, the entire left face was replaced by a huge blood hole, and even one eyeball was broken. As the son of the emperor of the entire Grand Sovereign, he had suffered such a terrible humiliation. "Kill me, kill them, and leave no one behind." The sound of crying blood resounded, and the black robe that had saved his life before bowed his head respectfully. "Yes, 5 sons." Stepping out, Wan Jun's supreme power swayed, letting the already fierce killings stop. The black robe stretched out the old palm and slowly pulled down the hood, revealing an old face full of folds. "Bring the head on. I will let you die. Otherwise you will have to be humiliated." The ancient voice echoed from the mouth of the black robe. Behind him, there is a dim black light wheel. If Jian Wushuang is here, you will find that this black light wheel is exactly the same as the light wheel behind the elders you saw in the heavenly court. This is a sign of the complete transition from Yanxian to Dianxian. The 7 figures did not seem to be shocked by a Dian fairy. There were 2 figures on the spot. Arms shook, and a light wheel floated behind. Another 2 great Yanxian. It was originally planned to go forward and try hard to repair, and Yanxian. After seeing this scene, all of them consciously took a step back from the battlefield. It's really generous. I say why you are not afraid. It turns out that you have already made full preparations. The black robe showed in the old-fashioned eyes, and he was not afraid. With me in, you can never hurt the 5 sons. With a cold snork, the young guard who exposed the realm of Dian, Immortal took a step forward, his palms coming. A blow completely out of the strength of the Immortal. The cover hit the black robe. The black robe resisted and sent shock waves. Under these shock waves, even the giant pillars in the palace were fragmented by the impact, and even Yanxian could not stop. Gongzi Mo was directly flew out, and he was lying on the ground in a state of embarrassment. He watched with only one eye left, as if looking for something. At the first moment of the outbreak of this war, the silver bells snuggling beside him disappeared without a trace, as if there had never appeared. 5 sons, run fast, run fast. The white-robed Yanxian, who has been closely following the son Mo, appears in time, dragging him and preparing to escape. The sun's ink was unnoticed, and his ugly face was expressionless. You said it was the sun's correction, or the other brothers want to kill me. Don't think about this first. Hurry to heaven. Bai Pao Yanxian was also scared by this scene. The assassination of the two Dian immortals, such terrible handwriting. I am afraid that this entire division has no power to come up with, but now it has actually appeared. The young man corrects, must be the young man correct. I want him to pay for his life. The youngster Mo burst out loud, his breath rising at an incredible speed. The two Dian immortals in the second town, and the first one, while watching the sun Mo still not dead, waved his palms, and the remaining 5 bodies were enlightened, and they ripped open and surrounded. Even the master son Mo grasped and realized a fairy style, which had no effect on the situation at hand. When the venomous snake behind exposed its fangs, everything was too late to recover. The white-robe Yanxian, who was standing in front of him, even had time to reach out and resist. And the next moment it turned into a powder. The sun was stunned, facing the figure that was about to come around, motionless. At this moment, a physique carrying the general trend, moving clouds and riding the wind, rushed into the hall at an unimaginable speed. No one noticed the scene of the 5 figures that surrounded the Sun Inc. At first, a tall, thin figure holding a real sword did not stab at his very source in the slightest amount. Abnormal change, the tall, slim figure only felt a heavy kick kicking behind him, and then the whole person flew out. A kick will encircle a gap, and Jian Wushuang picks up his son's ink and moves back without any stay. Seeing the other 4 figures, they all stretched out their hands and held them in the air. Jian Wushuang only felt a tight chest for a while, and the speed of his retreat slowed down for a moment. He didn't think about it. He directly condensed an invisible sword in his right hand and cut off the invisible breath that trapped him. Chasing, the 5 people broke off in unison and rushed towards Jian Wushuang. But with the majestic sword in tension, it surged from behind the sword Wushuang, like the big river and the sea, and pushed directly to those 5 bodies. I said, "Can you change your goals like me?" With the left hand holding the sword and the right hand holding a pair of ear flasks, Chun Qing's free and easy figure was blocked in front of several people. "Go away." All 5 physiques pounced on him. Chun Qing broke into a sigh and led the sword to fight. After a moment of breathing, young Master Mo looked at the ordinary guard with heroes in his face and inexplicably felt a familiar breath. Looking at the undeserved son Mo in his hand, Jian Wushuang directly pressed him against a giant pillar with one hand and then pulled out a dense pattern of bones with sky patterns from his arms. "Give me this kind of thing." "Why, what?" Young Master Mo looked at the sword Wushuang, who wasn't a good man, and then looked at the sky-shaped bone armor in his hand, inexplicably familiar. "Don't play tricks on me. Give this thing to me. I will spare you a life. Otherwise, I will rush to crush your fairy source before they want to kill you." Jian Wushuang's voice was cold and cold. Inexplicably, the sun hit a chill, and his strong desire to live made his memories of the past gradually come to mind. "This thing, I also seem to have a piece in my arms." Chapter 47:62. Jian Wushuang heard the words, grasping the sun's neck with one hand, and the other hand stepped directly into his arms. Under the combined offensive of the 5 mysterious figures, Chun Qing has been unable to persevere for a long time and has already begun to catch up. In less than 10 breaths, he had to find the sky-shaped bone armor and escaped from here. But at the next moment, the completely unmovable sun suddenly flashed a bit of tyranny, and the palm behind his back brought out a glimmer of light and stabbed directly at Jian Wushuang. A strong crisis rushed into his heart. He almost stabbed his head an inch at the same time as the light stabbed. However, it was still too late. The palm glowing in the light left a narrow wound directly in Jian Wushuang's neck, and the blood of the gods spewed out. He was in pain. the palm of his hand was unconscious, and the young man Mo took the opportunity to push it back with another palm, and then quickly escaped. Death. Jian Wushuang was furious, and his neck was recovered at a very fast speed. He smashed his palm forward and almost blocked all the retreat of Gongziemo. However, this established situation has changed again. The Sun Mo is desperate, pouring all his energy into the left arm, and at the cost of breaking the whole arm, tearing the majestic momentum of Jian Wushuang. Then Master Mo turned around and looked at him bitterly, his body flickering out of the palace, and disappeared. Seeing this situation, how could Jian Wushuang let him go? And even if Chun Qing was struggling to resist, Chun Xiu and the two heard it and chased them out. Lao Tzu, I won't play with you anymore. Chun Qing's forehead and blue muscles are very fragile, and the figure that was almost hung up and barely separated. The 5 figures are very clear in goal, and there is no plan to fight with him again. Then he swept directly outside the hall. The whole temple was irreparably collapsed. In the sudden battle, a group of top practitioners and Yen Xian, who had originally been to the Banquet Heaven Temple, had already suffered more than half of their deaths and injuries, and the rest survived. They had already escaped from the Temple of Heaven. At this point, only 3 Dayan immortals were left in the whole crumbling temple, under the 2 towns, and one, the Black Robe, is embarrassed. The 2 Dayan immortals shot him down, making it difficult for him to get out of it, and even the immortal body vaguely reached the edge of collapse. Although he slept in the Temple of Heaven for a long time, the Black Robe is very clear. Except for the 99 people under the seat of the Emperor of the True Wuyang, the rest of the Dayan immortal in the vast, vast territory is absolutely not more than 1 hand. The so-called Dayan immortal is a mysterious existence that completely transcends the immortal immortality. Only when you reach the realm of Dayan immortal can you have such a chance to touch the Emperor's luck. This shows that the scarcity and terrible degree of Dayan immortal. But right now, there are 2 Dayan immortals to intercept the Master Ink. What a big deal. Looking at the vast, vast territory. Who can have such a means of heaven? He couldn't imagine it, and even thought it was the will of Shen Wuyang. Who are you seated in? But did you know that the killing of the Sun Mo was the enemy of the true Wuyang Emperor, and the entire big domain? The Black Robe was still holding the last fluke under hard resistance, trying to let them know the serious consequences. However, the 2 Dayan immortals who met with him ignored it and did not care about the so-called Zhenwiang Emperor in his mouth and the entire Daisai. The terrible force has already crushed and shattered the heaven above this little fairy, and countless ruins fell to Xianzhou, a school of destruction. And the son of Ben, who escaped from the Temple of Heaven, was like a dog at the moment, dragging a broken arm and fleeing desperately over the entire Xiaxianzhu, the red prairie field, and the extremely dark clouds under the hands of Dayan Xian vaguely showed signs of collapse. Jian Wushuang followed, and the narrow and long wound between his necks had healed completely, leaving no scars. What is happening now is far beyond his expectations. He didn't expect that there would be other people coming to intercept his son. And looking at this posture, it seems that it came from a complete extermination. Jian Wushuang does not care about his life and death, but the impact or consequences after this incident will be huge. As the 5th son of Zhenwiang's emperor, if he falls, I am afraid that all the top repairs and Yanxian in this war will be thoroughly investigated. The 3 of them are also very likely to be involved. Therefore, Master Mo cannot die. Even if it is dead, they cannot die in their hands. Find the sky-shaped bone armor, and then escape silently, which is the best solution for the moment. After Qin Qing and Chun Xiu were in charge, the mastermind who led the incident was isolated, and 5 of the 7 swordsmen were isolated. Right now, only Jian Wushuang is chasing Gongzi Mo in the clouds. The vast clouds and the real life and death terror made him burst out of his final potential. Even Jian Wushuang, who pursued with all his strength, was faintly struggling and was pulled away for a short distance. The sun broke through the clouds and fled towards the center of the entire Xiaoxianzhu. There is a celestial hibiscus tree based on Xianzhou. The canopy of the canopy is composed of huge dark green branches without a leaf, and above the crown of the sky hibiscus, a huge golden cage was hung. The golden cage is entrenched in a big day that cannot be looked directly at. At this moment, the young man Emo Nikang's body had already run to the hibiscus tree. "I Ching, rescue me!" A loud and frightened voice resounded from the mouth of Master ZMO, who was already the end of a strong crossbow and placed all hope in his voice. And in the golden cage of the hibiscus tree, the dazzling round of the sun moved. The head of the bird with the golden light will slowly lift it up. This is a Jinwu with 4 purposes. As its bird's head lifted, the polar night was dispelled, and the 2 pairs of red eyes were like 4 big suns, and Yao Yao could not look directly. Well, the cry that is about to tear the territory is going to be heard the whole night in the northern celestial state was dispelled, and the light came. The golden cage was opened, and it spread its wings and flew out. With its wings and feathers unfolding, the glorious momentum shone to the fairyland. A total of 9 red purple longling, with the Jinwu wings spread out to form a giant sun from its tail down with a magnificent momentum. At this moment, even Jian Wushuang lifted his hands subconsciously to cover his eyes and could not take a step forward. "It's too hot." A burning sensation from the depths of the god's soul made even Yanxian retreat. The transversal trend emanating from the Jiuling Zhenwu can no longer be measured by Yanxian. With such a breath, Jian Wushuang vaguely felt that it was about to reach a certain mysterious realm and reached another level. In his current cognition, this kind of breath has been infinitely close to the top existence in the heavenly court. Chapter 4763. Under the Zhenliang seat, there are 99 Dian immortals who are beyond the realm of immortality. This is what Jian Wushuang knows after attending the Feast of Heaven. He knows very little about the realm of Dian immortal. He only knows that it is almost impossible for ordinary Yanxian to achieve Dian immortal. Even if it is like Chun Qing, I don't know how long it has been trapped in that step. In the early days of Jian Wushuang's transportation of the Montenegrin crystals during the Great Sale, the Wild Fox Sen and the Whirling Ancestor I met were probably the closest to Dianxian. Finally, when they were about to be promoted, Jian Wushuang carried the power of the Emperor Broken, his fairy source. Right now, the Jiuling Zhenwu with the general trend has the trend of the great Yanxian in this situation. Jian Wushuang's mouth could not help but show a bit of bitterness. The level of Dian Immortal is not something he can contend with. It is just a breath of escape that poses a big threat. However, despite the matter, Jian Wushuang didn't want to return it. He didn't want everything he had done before to be wasted. Just wait for the wrong situation, and then withdraw. Seeing Jean Wu's stretched figure, Master Emo seemed to have caught the last life-saving straw and ran straight to it. But at the next moment, the change is steep. The majestic momentum of tearing the heavenly dome in total is like 2 scares, smashing towards the sun's ink, apparently running away, but the predictable situation did not appear. Those 2 general trends did not fall on the body of Master ZMO, and as soon as they flew, they were shattered by the Jean Wu's wings. The aftermath scatters the quartet. Although he escaped the deadly robbery, he is so weak that he can't even bear the aftermath, and he vomits a lot of blood. At the same time, 2 figures appeared quietly. Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank slightly, and the 2 figures were the 2 great Yanxian who had just shot in the Temple of Heaven. He backed away slowly, ready to escape at any time. The battle at the level of Dian, immortal, the control of Yen force, is not at the same level as Yen Xian. The gap between the two is even greater than the gap between mortal and Yen Xian. So what Jian Wushuang thinks at the moment is not how to spend time among the Dian immortals, but thinking about retreating. Jean whispered head with red golden light. Will glanced at the two Dian immortals before looking at the undecided son Mo under him. It's clear. Quickly, kill them all. Leave no one. Young Master Mo breathed heavily, and the big hole pierced by the real sword on his face had been restored, and it was weirdly pale. At the same time, Jin's 4 eyes flashed a bit of disgust at the same time, and then he said to him in the back, I said, you dare to call me my name again. I will burn you into scum. Gongzi, Mo shrieked, seemed not to doubt the authenticity of his words at all. Ming, understand. Zun, do me a favor and wipe out all those who are going to kill me. Jin Wu, who is well known for the facts, glanced at the two Dian immortals again, and then looked at him with a smile. You have attracted such a powerful interception. The son of ink, your skills have grown a lot. Gongzi Maoen's face changed slightly. In short, you can solve the problem as soon as possible. I want them to live alone. A flash of laughter flashed in Di Qing's eyes, and the giant wings suddenly shook. Whether they can live or not depends on my mood, not on your decision. The giant wing covering the sky spreads out for thousands of miles, and the chirping sound emptied. Jian Wushuang only felt that the eardrum was about to be torn. He didn't hesitate anymore, and was about to escape directly. The momentum displayed by Jin Wu was beyond his imagination, not to mention the two Dian immortals. Just as Jian Wushuang was preparing to leave the back foot, a long sword with a sense of sensation reached his back. Don't leave if you don't want to die. A cold voice followed. Jian Wushuang looked back and saw that it was the young guard who had previously competed with him in the Temple of Heaven. At the same time, Chun Qing and Chuan Qiu were brought over by 4 figures. Brother Sword, be ashamed. Chun Qing sighed with some bruises on his face, apparently suffered a lot before. Jian Wushuang looked at the young guard behind him and said in a deep voice, This is a matter between you. We will leave now and do not participate in the fight. Don't talk nonsense. Do you think you can still withdraw from the whole body now? The young guard said coldly. Seeing leaving hopeless, Jian Wushuang prepared to take a break. The most intense battle broke out in the clouds. A total of 2 glorious generals evacuated the clouds and collided with naughty Qingsheng to burst into the most violent martyrdom. Even the hibiscus tree was shaken, and the whole body of the young son Mo lay dormant in the crown of the hibiscus tree, which was already a frightened bird. And in the first time when this battle broke out, I Ching got rid of the gold and black form and turned into a figure. As the unreal wings with gold streaks fluttered, the 2 Dian immortals could not get a step forward. Di Qing, not Yinggu, looked at the 2 men with a bit of unruly evil spirit in his eyes. Now I wait for the original path to retreat. I will not pursue it. If I wait still, I will let you die. Hearing this, the 2 tall, thin, and big Yenxian, who carried the black light, didn't have any expressions, and they seemed completely disappointed. Their goals are extremely clear, and it is absolutely impossible to return to them just because of the 2 sentences of the meaning. Immediately afterwards, the 2 Dian immortals worked together again, twisting the clouds, and the coming side covered the palm of the sky, smashing towards the Qing. Qing Yiran was not afraid, and raised her palms with a grin in his eyes to deal with it. At the next moment, Di Qing's seemingly flirtatious palm was actually resisting the advent of the heavenly palm. A red awn surrounded the palm of the hand, and covered the entire palm of the sky with the singularity in a flash. It was only a brief moment, which was completely burned by Chimeng by the joint efforts of 2 great Yenxian, and he didn't even stay for half a breath. Town! The 2 rumblings were resounding, and the supreme power quietly condensed into a dark giant tripod, once again smashing towards the Qing. The phantom red gold wings fluttered behind him, and I saw that every ray of red ons turned into a light golden black. A total of tens of thousands of Jinwu formed a large group and bravely attacked Boom. The impact of the two is constantly being consumed, and the turbid black force and the red gold force are raging in the clouds, and finally the clouds can't bear and start to break. As the smashed, inky giant tripod continued to dim, it was even more meaningful to laugh in the clear eyes standing in the void. At the same time, there are 9 red purplish long ling growing from between his hair tips. He grabbed one of the long lings with his hand and pointed the lingering point at one of the great Yenxian, and said lightly, "Since you insist on not leaving, stay here all. I will let you know, even if it is dying immortal. It is difficult for me to have a battle in front of me." Chapter 47:64. A black and black treasure covered the sky, and the sun quietly emerged behind Di Qing's eyes, and the eyes of the big day cast a black flame. At this moment, even several swordsmen who used a real sword to hold Jian Wushuang and others retreated. "Enjoy it, everyone, and then you will feel the anger coming here." I Ching opened his arms slowly, and the magnificent Hua Yu began to appear from under his arms. The two were obviously Dian-immortalized face, and there was still no expression on their faces, but from their solemn eyes, Di Qing's words were true. Black Wu Baoxiang, screaming in the sky, the energetic force in the entire Xiaxians who gathered towards him. With an unimaginable trend, the pressure fell down. Wisps of black inflammation condensed on the black Wu Bao phase, and it suddenly opened its mouth to cry, lowering the amount of black inflammation. Jian Wushuang and other people really saw that even if the black inflammation that came down was stained with a ray, even if it didn't die, it would have to fade away. Immediately, the young swordsman holding Jian Wushuang directly dragged him back quickly. "Unlimited!" Di Qingqing smiled coldly. The two Dian immortals joined forces once again, and an inky giant tripod, larger than before, stopped in front of him and smashed forward. The innumerable fire that Black Wu Songming dropped like a rain curtain was carefully poured in every inch of space. Oh, the shocking black inflammation, even the diffusive force of the sky, swallowed up, collided with the black giant tripod, and burst into a detailed, sizzling sound. The tremendous power made the retreating people feel the unspeakable chest tightness. At the same time, black inflammation like rain pouring down on every place in Xiaxianzhu. Large-scale destruction began. Thousands of immortal palace pavilions, all contaminated with black inflammation, collapsed and vanished and turned into a fluffy fly. Xiaxianzhu, which was originally the most powerful of immortal energy, turned into a dead domain at a very fast rate. At this moment, the ink of the sun lying on the top of the hibiscus tree. Seeing this situation, the heart is constantly bleeding. All his insides are burned here. "Junzun, leave me a little." In the end, he could not help but say. Responding to him, it was I Ching who froze coldly, looking at his incomparable back. Gongzi Mo's eyes flashed a rage and resentment, but soon returned to normal. After all, he can only rely on the truth to survive. "Wait, I will escape this disaster, and you must die without a burial ground." The sun said darkly. Only the general situation exuded by this black and black treasure phase pressed the entire Xianzhou, and no one dared to fight against it. The two great Yenxian, who carried the black Wu Jiuqing black inflammation, eventually exhausted the black inflammation at the cost of the destruction of the black giant. I Ching's face was cold, and he reached for a finger. The dark black head behind him suddenly screamed, dragging the terrifying dark yen power, and landed from the sky dome, about to swallow the two great Yenxian. It is dark in Xiaxianzhu, and the strength is no longer quiet, but a violent tide is generated. Seeing this situation, Jian Wushuang broke up in an instant, and supreme power directly swayed the real sword behind him, and with the speed of the extreme, turned around a knee and slammed into the young guard. Due to the fluctuation of Yanli tide, all Yanxian present could not detect the danger in time. Therefore, when the youth guard responded, it was already too late, and the belly was hit hard by Jian Wushuang. Mumming sounded. He was like a falling kite. One end fell towards Zayok Xianzu. Almost at the same time, Chun Qing and Chun Xiu suddenly broke out, forcing the remaining 4 musketeers. Then Chun Xiu summoned his 8-armed eyes and fought against several swordsmen. Brother sword, quick battle. Chun Qing pulled out the real sword around his waist and looked sharply at Jian Wushuang. We will break it for you. Sword had no double-headed head, and then he looked through the waves and waves of tide and looked at the sun ink lying on the hibiscus tree. At the next moment, he stepped on the cloud of his feet and sprinted forward. No matter the top of his head, he could destroy the battle of heaven and earth at any time. Just like the son of the startled bird, Emo immediately noticed Wushuang, who had swept towards him, and he became restless immediately. Respect the Lord to save me. Di Qing turned impatiently, and after seeing Jian Wushuang's flying body, without any hesitation, he opened his palms directly, transformed into thousands of strands of strength, and walked away. Thousands of Yanli turned into unmatched chains, bound to the sword Wushuang at an indescribable speed. The dynamism of such a realm has been able to obliterate Yanxian. Jian Wushuang only felt that the air around him was somewhat stagnation and sticky, and the chain of thousands of Yanli forces trapped him almost instantly, strong enough to crush the bones and bones as the chain tightened, added to his body. Seeing this, his son smiled coldly, and one of his broken arms was given by Wushuang Wushu. Now, the enemy was in front of him. He burst out in his palm. Looking at the dense chains of diffusive force around his body, Jian Wushuang slowly closed his eyes. Then, a small galaxy composed of 7 stars appeared in his eyebrows. This is a fairy style given to Jian Wushuang from that broken stone bead. A little mountain. Boom. A long ripple of water, with him as the center, directly stirred up, belonging to a fairy style beyond the perception of Yanxian, surging. Break me. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes. The eyebrow galaxy circulated, and the general trend, tens of strands of chains on his body shattered, and invisible and quality water dragons broke free from and entangled around him. In a little mountain and river, Jian Wushuang is the absolute master, breaking through the declining power of I Ching. He confronted him for the first time. Facing each other, Jian Wushuang had no fear, and reached out and waved gently. At once, a big vision appeared. The black inflammation that was originally brought down by the Qing dynasty was made into a dead area, and Zayok Xianzu was suddenly divided into 2 by the unknown force. Then, with countless gravel waste soil, half of the little fairy state, directly bombarded to Qing. I Ching's eyes narrowed. Can one use his own strength to divide the entire Zayok Xianzu into 2? Is this the terrible strength that Yanxian can master? Half a little fairy came out. I Ching pressed down the surprise in his eyes, snorted coldly, and stretched out his palm directly, holding it away. Immediately, the entire uncontrolled Zayok Xianzu stopped strangely at the same place, and then seemed to be squeezed into a ball by an invisible big palm, and then crushed into scum powder. The robe sleeves flicked away, and the powder disappeared, but there was a half-pointed sword in the same place. It's really interesting. A little Yanxian actually had a deterrent to me. Is this an illusion? I Ching looked at the long-gone figure meaningfully, and there was no next move. Chapter 47, 65. He did not intend to stop Jian Wushuang anymore, but to see what he intended to do. As for the safety of Gongzi Mo, in the eyes of Di Qing, it can be almost ignored. At the same time, the two Dayan immortals joined forces and eventually defeated the black Wubao phase of Di Qing. The dark power of Yanhe dissipated. One tall and two strong Yanxian still stood calmly, but the slightly undulating chest showed that it was not easy for them to win. Di Qing was even more amused by this. If you only have these strengths, let's go, guys who can't help themselves. And the two Dayan immortals, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke. Now it should not be ours, but you. If Zhen Wuyang knows that there is a person close to the emperor in his heavenly domain, you will definitely not survive. It is said that the grin on the original face gradually became stagnant, and a pair of black and white eyes also had a strong killing intention. You dare to threaten me? So what? As long as you continue to fight, Tianting will surely be aware of your existence. By that time, Zhen Wuyang will definitely shoot you to kill you. For the sake of a son, it is not worth it to put yourself in. Only you can never compete with the whole heavenly court. I Ching Yue heard, the colder his face. I hate threats the most. Since you threaten me, you must be prepared to die before me. Relax. I promise to kill you first, when Zhen Yang is aware of it. At the end of the speech, I Ching stretched out his hand and provoked a long feather between the hair tips. Then a white Wubao photo that covered the sky and sun gradually emerged. Compared with the previous black and white treasures, this white-black is more tyrannical, with unparalleled beams of strong sunlight projected in its wide eyes. Qingqi! I Qingshan screamed. He did not intend to keep his hands, released the most tyrannical form, trying to suppress it directly. The big fight starts again. On the other side, Jian Wushuang got rid of Ti Qing's shackles and urged him to scold towards his son. The son Mo, who had already killed him and put him into action, saw the sword Wushuang splitting half of the Xianzhou with his own strength, and he was shocked by the shock, and he directly stopped in the air and then reversed. The figure turned back to the hibiscus tree. Want to go? Leave it to me. Jian Wushuang drank coldly and reached forward with a hand. The space immediately collapsed, and the ink of the sun who was flying suddenly staggered and rolled directly out. Taking advantage of this, Jian Wushuang equalized and suppressed him with a palm. The rock, rising from the ground, nailed him firmly under the hibiscus tree. Let me go! Gongzi Mo shouted in panic. I will give you whatever you want, as long as you let me go. Jian Wushuang's brow furrowed, and he drew up with a straight palm to make him shut up. Then he reached into the arms of Master Mo directly. But he didn't find what he wanted. There was nothing in him's arms. There was half a piece of sky-shaped bone armor. What do I want? Jian Wushuangqiang swallowed his heart, coldly. Gongzi's eyes were horrified. Which kind of thing are you looking for? It's really in my arms. I haven't discarded it. Jian Wushuang didn't look like he was talking in his eyes, and he searched again. But the result was the same as before, and the sky-shaped bone armor was still not found. You lied to me? Jian Wu's double-sided color was cold, and his raised palm burst into murderous air. The sun's ink surface is as dead as dust. He clearly remembers that after the jade bone armor was picked up by himself, he has never lost it in his arms. But how can it disappear now? Jian Wushuang did not intend to kill him. In this case, if the required things are not found, he must get out as soon as possible to avoid being affected. Just as he was about to leave an impressive lesson for his son Mo, he left a cold voice resounding from behind him. Boy, go die. Di Qing's figure appeared quietly behind Jian Wushuang. Then he extended a finger and touched the back of Jian Wushuang. Buzz. One finger with the general trend of black and white from the back without any obstruction blasted his entire chest. Divine blood Yanli, Xianyuan are all broken at this moment. Jian Wushuang's pupils were placed to the greatest indescribable pain with a blank of divine consciousness which made him staggered, and then fell to the void. Di Qing withdrew his palms, and the color of regret was flashed away, and his back turned back again. The whole process was almost completed in one breath, and when the Sun Mo reacted, Jian Wushuang's broken figure was no longer alive. I'm fine, he murmured as he sat under the hibiscus tree. The entire northern celestial state has been completely chaotic, and all the top repairs and Yanxian that have not been affected have left in the first time. And the guards who should have arrived in the first time, after seeing the terrible scene of the Dianim mortal battle, all tacitly played and disappeared. The entire northern celestial state is located in the most northern territories of Desiyu, not far from Tianting. So at this moment, what happened in the northern celestial state has not affected the rest of the sky. On the broken ground, still lingering with speckled black inflammation, a broken figure lay on his back. The belly in front of him was empty, replaced by a big hole, and the fairy body was nearly broken by half. This kind of injury, in exchange for the rest of Yanxian, is already too dead to die. However, if you look closely, you can find that this figure, which should have disappeared, is full of the vigorous life that only souls have. The broken fairy body is also repairing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Immortal body. Even if the source of the fairy is broken, and the strength is scattered, but as long as there is a will to survive, it is enough to reshape. In the same way, this was replaced by the rest of Yanxian, who was supposed to have a deadly injury on Jian Wushuang. Not even a heavy hit. His fingers moved slightly, and his blank consciousness slowly recovered. Although the immortal body is constantly recovering, the severe pain after trauma still affects him. Above the clouds, a great battle still erupted, and the magnificent martyrdom exploded. Jian Wushuang lay on his back, expecting to recover soon. At this moment, a pair of white and tender feet tied with silver bells quietly stepped on the ground burned by flames. It seemed that the owners of these feet could not feel the heat. The luo skirt hanging on the ground was melting, exposing the bright and extremely pale skin of the calf. In the end, the master of these feet came to Jian Wushuang and squatted slowly. At the same time, a quaint and fissured gully was placed in front of him. Chapter 47, 66. Jian Wushuang's pupils condensed, and his breathing became heavy. The jade piece that caught his eyes was exactly what he had been looking for unsuccessfully. At this moment, the figure holding this bone armor is the silver bell mother who had been staying with Gongzi Mo. Jian Wushuang reached out unconsciously to grasp, but the silver bell suddenly withdrew his palm. This thing, you need it very much. Yinling waved his bone armor and looked at him playfully, has returned to almost the same sword Wushuang, propped up from the ground, staring at her closely. This thing is not useful to me, but it seems that you need it very much. Yinling said slowly, I can give it to you, but you have to promise me a condition. Say. Jian Wushuang frowned. Yinling nodded. The conditions are very simple. Take me out of here, and eternal life will no longer set foot here. I originally did not intend to exchange the swordsmanship of the exchange conditions. After hearing this simple news, I nodded directly. Yes, I promise you. Yinling smiled, but when he reached over, he quickly shoved the bone armor into his chest. I can't give it to you now. If you change your mind temporarily, it's me who is unlucky. Yinling said seriously. So I must leave by Shengxian's, who completely before I can give this thing to you. Jian Wushuang heard the words and did not express too much. Now, another piece of sky-shaped bone armor is in front of him, which greatly saves his energy. At the same time, in the face of such a simple request, you can change to a bone armor, not to mention regenerative killing. Although she may be a cumbersome or unstable factor, Jian Wushuang has decided to take her away. Reaching out the entrance of the crystal plug of the top of the Black Mountain to quickly nourish the newly recovered meridian, he said, "You wait here first, I will go back, and I will pick up later." Yinling shook her head directly. "No, I'll go with you. The variables are too big now, but it might be safer to follow you." Jian Wushuang was helpless, and regardless of her, he hurried to the sky. Although he wanted to restore his eyes to the truth that had hit him hard, the gap between the two was really too large. It would obviously be unwise to take revenge without consideration. Jian Wushuang took a deep look at Tai Ching and was ready to pick Qin Qing and Chuanqiu together. Just then, he glanced at the corner of the hibiscus tree. "I saw a ghostly figure emerge quietly behind the frightened sun, Mo. Perhaps the strange breath behind him was noticed, and the sun subconsciously shifted into a subconscious form. A flash of cold light flashed through, and the majestic, vigorous force directly crushed his half-body into scum powder. The screams resounded. "Yunzun, save me!" But at present, Qing Qing is in a struggle with the two Dian immortals. It is already very difficult to get rid of her figure, and it is even more impossible to go to aid like before. If it weren't for his subconscious turnaround, only the sneak attack would be enough to make his body disappear. Gongzi Mo's half-body was completely broken, and he collapsed under the hibiscus tree, his face ashes. The ghost-like figure slowly came to him, holding a real sword in his hand. The ghostly figure is wearing a spooky mask, but judging from the figure, it is a woman. Obviously, it was her who caused the greatest damage to the sun. Seemingly feeling the danger of dying, Gongzi Mo calmed down from the initial panic and began to fight back. With only one arm left, he released the majestic force and slammed into the ghost body. But at the next moment, she instantly cut out the sword and directly cut off the only arm left by Master Mo. The ghost body did not want to talk nonsense, after severing his arm sharply, urging the majestic force to break its fairy source. Abnormal changes. That magnificent trend was suddenly cut off before touching the fairy source of Gongzi Mo, and then, together with the ghost body, was trapped by a peculiar force. It's true again. He is really terrible. Just a wave of hand can easily trap a Yenxian. The ghostly figure did not anticipate this scene, and when the reaction came, everything was too late. Di Qing grabbed and held her, apparently intending to smash its fairy source directly from the air. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's figure suddenly arrived, holding the invisible sword, and directly cut off all the connections of the ghost's body. Di Qing's eyes suddenly glared, as if he saw something incredible, and he was obviously very surprised that Jian Wushuang was still alive, but he could no longer withdraw, facing the two seemingly vulnerable but extremely difficult Dian immortal, and unable to exert his full strength, he could only confront this way. Because once the Qing dynasty has made a more supreme trend, his unique breath will inevitably spread throughout the northern celestial state. If Tianting is aware, his ending will only come down or die. Therefore, he couldn't use his full strength at all, and could only stick together like this. Although the life and death of Master ZMO are not in the mind of Di Qing, the Enlightenment Dojo, he can give, and some conditions are still very rich. The true black blood veins, formed by the living creatures of the heavens and the earth, no matter how the avenue flows, are the most ancient and top-notch existence. Since the practice of Qingwa's practice has been completed, 9 roots have been cultivated, and if there is one more, one can realize the emperor's luck and reach the throne. So now, he can't have any failure, even with the ink of the sun, who provided him with dojo and resources. Jian Wushuang and I Ching coldly looked at each other, pulling the ghost body back without fear. The ghost body was slightly unnaturally freed, slightly. After Ukakanshu, calm was found to be in vain. He simply let him be involved. Back under the huge hibiscus tree, Jian Wushuang slowly spit out a murky breath. Waving his arm free of Jian Wushuang's palm, the ghostly figure with a mask came to Gongzi Mo. Perhaps after a series of fierce battles, the mask belt behind the ghostly body-shaped hair suddenly fell off, and then immediately fell down with a whole black gold mask. The green silk hung down, revealing a beautiful and delicate cheek with a little paleness. "It's you," Jian Wushuang blurted out subconsciously when he saw this highly recognizable cheek. "Zhang Ying." This woman with a beautiful and delicate cheek. It was Jian Wushuang's first voyage to the day when he reached Daanhuan and the spring and autumn of the Black Mountain Spar, soon after he defeated the giant sea Tianzhong, and then saw it in a sea area. To the unconscious woman, and after hearing the word Zhang Ying, the ghost body was shocked. Obviously, it was not expected that someone could call her a name in such a place. Chapter 47:67. For a moment, the air fell into a state of silence. Jian Wushuang soon came to understand why Zhang Ying was surprised, because he is now turned into a normal guard's face, which is completely different from his previous face. It was Zhang Ying who didn't recognize him as the Sword of Wushang on that voyage. It's just that at the moment when the two of them met again, they were so weird. This woman who disappeared quietly after the War of Wozhe Ocean, why is it suddenly appearing in Baitian Xianzhou right now? And it seems that he is running to kill the son of the town. Is she the messenger of a certain emperor under Zhenliang? Jian Wushuang was a little uncertain, but opened his mouth slightly but said nothing, and then turned to leave. At this moment, a sudden big crisis behind him made him suddenly turn his head. Then a tangled real sword almost rubbed his neck and thrust forward, bringing a trace of blood. If it wasn't for evasion in time, this sword was enough to cause serious damage to sword warriors. After he was able to escape the crisis, he turned to look at Zhang Ying, his eyes watery. Zhang Ying's beautiful face is cold and frost at the moment, and he holds the sword in his right hand. He doesn't even say a word, and carries Yanli to kill Xiangjin Wushuang again. "What's wrong with you?" The food caught the blade that went straight to his door in the blink of an eye. Jian Wushuang pressed his heart and angered, and came to Zhang Ying with such a sentence. "Really, I am a soft persimmon?" Zhang Ying, who was still in the stabbing state, was stiff again, and there were some doubts in her cold eyes, because she heard something familiar from the young guard in front of her. But at the next moment, a more chilling, murderous intention broke out. From behind Zhang Ying, there were suddenly hundreds of magnificent vigors, all of which were suppressed to Jian Wushuang. Rao thought about his old feelings again, and Jian Wushuang also raised his anger. He suddenly slammed the front with his palms and fought against those forces. A small burst of martyrdom stirred up under the hibiscus tree. At the same time, Jian Wushuang pointed out again, turned into several Yanli water dragons trapped to Zhang Ying. He didn't want to put Zhang Ying to death. After all, he was one of the few people he saw when he first came to Daanhuan, so he only aimed to trap her. But the more this is, the more fierce Zhang Ying's resistance is, exceeding the general strength of Yan Xian, which makes Jian Wushuang also a headache. "What are you going to do? Don't go too far. Zhang Ying." Jian Wushuang looked at the woman in front of her and said in a deep voice. Zhang Ying, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. "How do you know my name?" Jian Wushuang was silent when he heard the words. Only then did he realize that he could not reveal any information about himself at all. At the end, he emptied and pushed Zhang Ying away. "Don't care who I am. I advise you, Sun Zimo is better not to kill." After leaving this sentence, Jian Wushuang apparently didn't want to get entangled anymore, and just walked away, looking at the somewhat familiar back. Zhang Ying did not catch up, but turned to look at the prince's ink lying under the hibiscus tree. After several fights and escapes, Gongzi Mo has already opened his eyes, leaving only his eyes unwilling. Under the cooperation of Diqing and Dianxian, the entire Xiaoxianzhu and even the North Tianxianzhu are on the verge of collapse. The old root of Panshan in the hibiscus tree has broken, and the gravel is falling. Zheng Ying stepped forward, facing the setting sun of the sun, without any hesitation. A sword cut off the head of the sun, Mo. Then she stretched out her palm again, releasing the majestic force and crushing his fairy source easily. At this point, Zhen Wuyang seated the fifth emperor, Sun Inc., under the hibiscus tree. The northern Tianxianzhu, which was supported by Gongzi Modiza's Qiyun, began to collapse, and all avenues and Qiyun began to be disordered. Heaven and earth mourn. This is the reaction of the death of the emperor. And Zheng Ying, the terminator of everything, looked at the dead head in his hand and waved his hand to intercept the last luck of his son, Mo, who belonged to the emperor. In the end, the head turned into a cup of powder and fell under the hibiscus tree. The emperor passed away, and the avenue of heaven and earth shuddered. At this moment, Yanxian or Dianxian, who fought in the northern Tianxianzhu, noticed. Jian Wushuang turned around and looked at the end with a complicated look. The figure standing under the hibiscus tree then left quickly. In the end, Gongzi Mo died, and any Yanxian or Dianxian present would definitely be thoroughly investigated by heaven. If any clues are left, it will surely be a disaster. Jian Wushuang will never forget that, apart from the true Wuyang, who is emperor's luck, there are 99 Dian immortals in the entire heavenly court. Any one of them has the absolute power to play against the Qing dynasty alone. So right now, escaping quickly is the most correct choice. Qun, Qing, and Chuanxiu, who are fighting desperately, only feel that they are all loose. The mysterious five swordsmen stopped the offensive, and they all screamed at the sky dome, "The son of Ink is dead! Withdraw!" The two blood-stained Dian immortals heard the words and gave up the confrontation with Di Qing directly, preparing to escape. "Want to run? Leave it to me." Di Qing screamed. Angrily, his arms shook, and they grabbed them. The two great Yanxian, hurriedly running Yanli's general resistance. And at the same time, he said with a deep voice, "Young Master Mo is dead. Heavenly Court will inevitably pursue it. And now he will not go again. You can't walk away if you want to go." I Ching smiled. "There is so much time. I will kill you first, and it will not be too late." No brain idiot. Since they couldn't get away, the two Dian immortals were also anxious. At this node, staying here for one more point, the more unlikely it is to escape. But Diqing did not allow them to leave, and once again struggled. "Spring and autumn. Qing, let's go." With a deep voice, Jian Wushuang's body was like electricity, carrying the general trend, directly opening the blockade of the five swordsmen, and giving aid to the two. Chun Qing and Chuanxiu nodded, and the three escaped together. Brother Sword the Sun, Mo really died. During the escape, Chun Qing couldn't help asking. He still couldn't believe it. The fifth emperor under Zhen Wuyang just died like this? Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. The luck has gone, and there is no chance of survival by chance. Chun Qing nodded, not knowing whether it was joy or worry in his eyes. "Damn it, playing so hurriedly, I actually forgot to sprinkle hot urine on the temple of heaven." "Don't think about it. Run away from here first. The northern celestial state is vast, but with the dispersal of the emperor's luck, the avenue is extremely disordered, and the entire celestial state is irreversibly broken. And Jian Wushuang is to run away from Xianzhou with all his strength before Tianting comes, and hide the breath as much as possible. The chaotic situation right now is exactly what he wants. As long as he leaves Xianzhou, even if the emperor comes in person, he will never be aware that he has been there." Chapter 47, 68. Under the hibiscus tree, Zheng Ying glanced back, the figure that had gone away. She seemed a bit enlightened. After counting interest, her figure disappeared quietly when the hibiscus tree completely collapsed. Brother Sword, at most within half a day, we can leave the Xianzhou. Have you found what you need? Chen Qing asked. Jian Wushuang didn't open his mouth, but looked at Yin Ling, who was right next to him. You can rest assured that as long as you are out of this northern celestial state, you will get what you want immediately. Yin Ling patted the chest that had peaks and smiled proudly. Without a double-sided color, the sword turned his head to the side. Seeing this scene, both Chen Qing and Chen Qiu looked a little strange. Isn't this lady the woman of the son-in-law? Chen Qing looked a little stunned again. Yin Ling heard the words. Chiong Nose snorted, "Hey, that stupid big one, which one of your eyes saw me as a son of ink? I was just him imprisoned by him. Now that he is dead, I am free." Chen Qing pouted and didn't say much, for completely hidden figures are leaving quickly. But in the next moment, Jian Wushuang felt a big crisis. Seemingly to confirm his thoughts, the northern celestial state, which had been trapped in the red and dark, began to be illuminated by a white gold awning. Then, just as Jian Wushuang and others were about to step out of the northern celestial state, in one step, a barrier with invisible haze appeared outside the northern celestial state. Well, Jian Wushuang's heart sank fiercely, and a chilling impression swept through. Chen Qing and others saw the situation, and the mood also sank to the bottom. The whole broken north celestial state was blocked by external forces, and those who can block by Shengxianzu with such a general trend, except for that kind of existence, even Dianxian can't do it. Jian Wushuang's eyes revealed a dignity and bitterness. "Brother Sword, what should I do? Do I have to rush out?" Chun Qingming said with a sharp voice. Jian Wushuang shook his head. "From now on, we can't use our strength. This barrier is definitely not something we can break through and watch its changes." After he finished speaking, he took the three men directly to a broken Xianfu pavilion, converging all his breath on the broken sky dome. Hundreds of millions of white gold mansions began to bloom and empty against the clouds. At the same time, there are tens of old men carrying all kinds of light wheels coming from the clouds. The original Qing, who was still fighting on the sky dome, also noticed this scene. "Damn idiot, wait to die." One of the great Yan Xian, who fought against Qing Qing, exasperated and wanted to tear away Qing Sheng. Di Qing withdrew his palms and looked at the old men standing in the clouds, and there was a big fear in his eyes. The two great Yan Xian glanced at each other, and their backs flew from left to right. "Evil creature." One of the old men carrying the dark black Will lifted his palms, showing a tendency to cover the pressure. Even if they were separated by millions of stars, they still directly captured and escaped Dian Immortal. At the same time, there was another old man carrying a red light wheel, took a slap-sized porcelain bottle from his arms, and directly ingested another Dian Immortal. But in the blink of an eye, the two escaped Dian Immortals were all caught. Afterwards, the old man carrying the black light Will used his magical power to squeeze the two Dian Immortals into the size of a projectile. 5 sons, are you buried in the hands of air? Hong Zongdala's magnificent sound was heard through Xianzhou. The two great Yan Xian, who had never been able to live forever, were all frightened at the moment, because they saw that there was an ordinary old man in black robe walking slowly. This old man is Yu Bo, the most mysterious elder behind Zhenmuyang. It has nothing to do with us. We just pass by here. The 5 sons were not killed by us, but someone else. They still wanted to say something, but the old man in black robe just flicked their hands at them, and then let their spirits disappear, and the immortals disappeared. What terrible strength is this, destroying Dian Immortal, and even the power of Yen has not been released. On the cheeks full of ravines, it seemed as though he had done all the secrets of the vicissitudes of the world. Eventually he looked at the muddy eyes, not far away. I Ching slowly stepped back half a step and stared at him. 5 sons, do you bury your hands? The hoarse voice sounded, and Yu Bo's eyes were calm to horror, as if time had stalled. Proud to be as clear as the meaning, they have to bow their heads at this moment. No, it is not possible to be buried in my hands, but in the hands of their associates. There was a woman who cut down the hair of his son Mo and destroyed his fairy source. Di Qing pointed his finger to a distant place. 5 musketeers. Shun said. Yu Bo looked pale. He slowly stretched out his palm from the sleeve of his robe and slowly grasped in the void. Along with his grasp, the northern Tiangxiansu, which was on the verge of breaking, accelerated the breakage. Whether it was the Xianfu Pavilion or the thousands of creatures, it was inevitable that it turned into nothing. In this case, all of you will be buried with the 5 sons. Gu Jis' old voice resounded. Yu Bo's voice is like an avenue, making the entire northern celestial state irreversible. Di Qing's pupils suddenly froze. He stepped back a few steps. What do you mean? You have clearly told you the real murderer. Why don't you let me go? The death of the 5 sons is inseparable from the entire northern celestial state, and naturally, you all have to be buried together. Yu Bo's voice was indifferent and unquestionable. Di Qing's complexion was blue. Do you think you'll take care of me like this? If I leave, no one can stop me. At the end of the speech, a huge golden treasure was revealed behind Di Qing, and his entire body was filled with a faint prestige. Facing more than 10 Dayan immortals carrying light wheels and unpredictable Yu Bo, he chose a battle, but the battle hadn't even started yet. Yu Bo reached out his hand and pointed a black light through the void, tearing away the golden and precious treasures of the Qing dynasty and smashing his fairy source. Dead silence, extreme dead silence. It's impossible for a lifetime. So arrogant that the essence of one enemy is 2, and his fairy source is so broken. The breakdown of Xian Yuan is irreversible injury, which symbolizes the final death sentence of Yen Xian. Di Qing died in this way. Thousands of Hua Yu stripped from his body, scattered in the void. Then, his figure was planted into the broken Xianzhou. After 1 finger extermination, Yu Bo raised his arms again, and the entire northern celestial state, under his control, was completely crushed into powder. Even if it is Yen Xian, they will never survive. With the death of the 5 emperors and the son of Mo, the entire trillion creatures in Xianzhou were buried with him. There is no one who can repair Yu Yen and escape from the road of Yu Bo. But perhaps everything should have exceptions. Chapter 47, 69, with the entire North Celestial State completely crushed into powder, trillions of creatures were buried with each other. Yu Bo returned to heaven with the elders. Come in a hurry, go in a hurry. Everything seemed to be erased, and it never seemed to exist. The thick powder was swallowed and absorbed by the wind in the world. The heavens originally belonging to the northern celestial state were erased and replaced by nothingness. Perhaps it will take millions of reincarnations of the galaxy before it is possible to give birth to a new heaven. In the star-studded world, as the powder fell, there were still faint auras. Brothers, let's be developed now. Who has ever seen such a crystal with such a strong and pure power? God, this can be more tens of than Tianjing. Wrong hundreds of times. Unexpectedly, in this desert where the birds are not shit, we can find such treasures by our brothers. So we should be developed. No, how come there are legs? In the yellow sand that covered the sky and the sun, there were more than 50 men in thick and long suits, swallowing saliva in the face of the black spar as high as the hill. And these men's cultivation practices are actually not weak, All of them are ancestor-level cultivation. At this time, the two guys closest to the black spar, after seeing a leg pressed under the spar, stretched out their hands directly. Wow la la! Along with the collapsed flow of black spar, the masters of those legs finally appeared. Oldest, this is a man. The bearded man could not help chanting after seeing the figure clearly. Noisy, haven't you seen a man? One of the white-faced men glared at him angrily, then fixed his eyes on the unconscious man and took a breath. At this moment, the man who was comatose in the crystal of Montenegro had all his upper body clothing torn, revealing a shapely figure. At the same time, his naked skin was extremely red, as if soaked in blood, and on his chest there was a flaming phoenix that seemed to be able to break free from and rush to the sky at any time. At the first sight of this unconscious, mysterious man, a big crisis emerged in the heart of the white-faced man. The instinct to escape several times told him that this man is definitely a terrifying existence. Boss, there are people here. The Nahua man shouted again, pointing at the other leg buried in the black spar. Boss, what should we do? The man, who also saw some clues and asked in a deep voice, also saw a bit of fierceness in his eyes. The white-faced man is not the hesitant, when even narrowing his eyes. While they are all in a coma, kill them on the spot. Leave no one. All the top repairers ordered their lives and rushed forward eagerly and manipulated their respective strengths in preparation for killing. But at this moment, a shocking, strange noise suddenly resounded, followed by countless strong and powerful forces, and turned into a dense net. The men of the white-faced man hadn't reacted yet. On the spot, more than a dozen Dingshio were strangled by the force of falling from the sky. Bad boss, the guys from Sand Devil's Cave, are here. Luahu, who shouted in exclamation, but before he ran to the white-faced man, he was penetrated by Yanli from the sky. Dripping blood stained his face. The manic sandstorm swept up from the ground, accompanied by a horrible wind, with hundreds of lazy forms coming from far and near. Boss, withdraw quickly. We are far from their opponents. The white-faced man slightly jumped in the corner of his eyes, obviously not reconciled. This black spar, which is far more precious than Tianjing, is hundreds to thousands of times. It was already a thing in his pocket, and now he is giving it away. How can he do it? But it wasn't until the figures riding on Huang Sha got closer and closer that the white-faced man finally waved his hand unwillingly. Withdraw. When he was about to retreat, he reached out again and swallowed nearly 1,000 pieces of Montenegrin crystals before he hurried away. It's really ugly. This group of miscellaneous people dare to find food in our realm. It's really awkward. The yellow sand dissipated, and the hundreds of figures gradually emerged. At the forefront of these figures, a young man dressed in casual clothes and slightly sloppy, looking at those fast-moving figures, snorted at the ground disdainfully. Brothers, move to me quickly, whoever left a piece and tied the city gate to hang for 10 days. The wandering young man's face was mixed, and with his waved hand, all the 110 men behind him fluttered, thinking on the spar piled up on the hill, began to carry it. A black spar was photographed with a wave of hand, and the young waver raised his eyebrows and smiled. It's really good. This is all for the elder sister, and it's a big thing. Commander Chui, there are a few people under these crystals, a man reflected, and at the same time, he dragged these figures either buried under the crystals or buried in the yellow sand. A total of 6 bodies, 5 men and 1 woman. When the young man who was called the leader of Chui Tong saw the comatose woman, he couldn't help but shine. Despite being very embarrassed, Huang Sha couldn't hide his soft posture. Chui Tongling, their identity is unknown, it is still better to contact. The middle-aged man beside the Fongling youth pulled him at the right time and reminded quietly, "Are you reminded? This commander just wants to find out if they are acting dizzy to prevent unnecessary situations. The Fangling youth shook the middle-aged man's palm and stepped forward, probing it fakely. From this perspective, he also saw some clues. At present, these 5 men and a woman and 6 bodies are all extremely traumatized, almost leaving only one breath. Especially a tall, middle-aged man in a broken black Jinhua suit. The whole chest was torn by some terrible force. And from the perspective of these people's clothing, all of them have a sense of dignity and prestige. The most important thing is that he can't see the strength of these people. Where do these suspicious guys come from? And why can it give me a sense of deterrence? Fangling youth rubbed his chin in the palm, thinking. Lord Chui, what about these unconscious people? The middle-aged man reminded in due course. When the Fangling youth heard the words, he no longer thought, and waved his hand directly. As long as he is found by us, it belongs to us. They all bring me into the city, and don't let me drop a hair. In the ups and downs, the vast yellow sand became the only main color. Due to too much shaking and bumps, he was forced to slowly open his eyes from the pain. A wisp of pure red light flashed deep in the pupil of the eye, and the stars between the eyebrows began to flow slowly. Chapter 4770. However, the converging force of yen only existed for a moment, and then dispersed completely. Pain comes from the overwhelming pain above the consciousness. Whether it is a consciousness or a source of immortals, or an immortal body, it was destroyed in the fall of the northern celestial state. In the final destruction process, with his own fairy body, he absorbed more than half the breath of destruction, protecting Chunqing, Chuanqiu, and Yinling, so that Jian Wushuang was almost crushed by the general trend. If there is no blood of the ancestor Feng Feng in Feng Qi's body, Rao is a trait of super-perfect chaotic creatures. Although he will not let Jian Wushuang fall, he is enough to let him fall into a long sleep. Feeling that the blood of the ancestor and phoenix in the body gradually dimmed, he knew that at least one more time the blood of Feng Qi left in his body would disappear completely. Today's swords are unparalleled. Except for their eyes turning, all other parts are in an uncontrolled state of chaos. He forbared the pain of being shattered and split, and the fusion, looking at the whole body and the front. In the wind and sand, this team of hundreds of people is moving forward slowly. I don't know where to go. He wanted to leave, but found that he was tied into a dumpling by a unique chain, lying on the hill-like black mountain crystals, and could not move at all. Chunqing, Chuanqiu, and others around Jianwushuang, without exception, were all wrapped in dumplings and were still in a coma, ignorant of where they were. Jian Wushuang wanted to struggle to get up, but the pain from each cell caused him to persevere for a moment before finally passing out. As he closed his eyes saw that in the misty yellow sand, a black giant gate appeared. A slight moan sounded, and then Jian Wushuang woke up from the initial coma. False Khan gushed out from his temples, although it has recovered, but at most it has recovered by 10%, and even the weak dynamism can only be forced to move. This was the heaviest injury since he came to Daanhuan, and almost the immortal body was almost broken. As a result, Jian Wushuang realized Yuba's terrible strength. What a terrible existence! He would have destroyed 2 great Yenxian with a wave of his hand and shattered the Qingxian source with 1 finger. Is he the supreme power of the same level as the Emperor Zhenliang? There is no answer. What Jian Wushuang can think of is that they escaped from the dead and escaped from Yubo. The cause of death of Gongzi Mo will be completely buried. At least they will not be thoroughly investigated. Slowly spitting out a sigh of breath, Jian Wushuang only realized that his situation was not optimistic at the moment, and he could even describe it as bad, because the sword at this time was unparalleled, trapped by a rope, and hung high on a wall. Not only him, the sleeping Chen Qing, Chuan Xiu, and others were all lined up beside him, hanging on the wall without exception. The city wall was made up of something, and on the dark wall, a thick bone spur was exposed abruptly, and it looked extremely ugly. And looking at this side of the sky dome, the red clouds condensed by resentment and blood almost condensed into substance. How much killing is this created to have such a vision? Jian Wushuang has a terrible headache. Since entering this great Yanhuan, he is almost always in a passive situation, only then left alive from the northern celestial state, and now it is so end. Since the damage had not yet been recovered, he couldn't even move freely, so he had no choice but to hang the rope on his body. Afterwards, Jian Wushuang turned his gaze to his side. Although Chen Qing, Chun Xiu, and others were all traumatized to varying degrees, they were far from fatal, and the breath tended to be stable. When he looked to the right, he was shocked. That was killed by Yu Bo on the spot, smashing the essence of Xian Yuan. At the moment, he was hanged by Jian Wushuang's side with the same posture. Although the breath was slightly inaudible, he was actually alive. It's not good news that Tai Ching didn't die, and it was a big threat to him. Jian Wushuang is already thinking about it. Not only Di Qing, but also a figure wearing a broken armor, also hung on the city wall. Jian Wushuang looked at the reel and immediately noticed that the figure in the broken armor was the young guard who had held him before, one of the 7 swordsmen. Among these figures, only the most important one is missing, the silver bell with the sky-shaped bone armor. Even at the last moment of the destruction of Xianzhou, Jian Wushuang also took into account the existence of Yinling and protected her, never fell. Now that she is alone, there is only one possibility that he will be taken away by the people in this evil city. At this moment, Chun Qing and Chuan Xiu woke up wandering around and looked around dizzily, speechless. Where is this? Have we escaped from the northern celestial state? Chun Qing fainted and then saw Jian Wushuang beside him. His eyes lit up. Brother Sword, are we dead? Of course not dead. Chuan Xiu was extremely weak, but not far from death. It's good to escape. We are all living together this time. Wait, is our location a bit weird now? Who the did we hang us on the city wall? Chun Qing was shocked and twisted his body to get rid of the shackles, but found that he couldn't even make a little effort out. Jian Wushuang said in a timely manner, "Don't waste your energy, recover well, and want to come to those who caught us, and will come out soon." As his words fell, the dusty city gate opened slowly, and a faint smell flew out. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but frown slightly. It seemed that the Feng Tianyu was exactly the same as he had guessed, with a killing intention. As the city gate slowly opened, a team of 8 came out. In the center of the team, 4 people carried a soft bed. Above the soft bed, there was a young boy with disheveled clothes and a loose figure. Needless to say, it must be us who are tied together. Chun Qing looked iron and wished to bleed them on the spot. And Chuan Xiu also changed his face and whispered in a low voice, "No, the abstinence is gone." Neiji was given to him by himself when Jian Wushuang and others left the 6-day realm. The storage of the top crystal in Montenegro almost reached the point of terror. The top crystal inside is enough to let the top-strength strongmen in one side of the sky fall into the fight for fighting. The loss right now is an inestimable loss. It must have been taken away by the gang who trapped us. If I waited for Lao Tzu to recover, he would shoot them to death. Chun Qing's teeth creaked, but he was hit hard, and he might face an ancestor. There is no backhand in top repair.